Good evening. Welcome to the Greytown Council Budget Workshop for March 19th, 2024. I'll begin with roll call. Councillor Gass. Present. Councillor McGuire.
Present.
Councillor Meany.
Present.
Councillor Height.
Here.
And I'm Councillor Chapman. We are joined in chambers this morning by a large number of staff, including Town Manager Mike Foley, who's at the podium. Mike, did you want to start us off?
Yeah, we can get started. Our first budget to talk about this evening is the library. Before we actually get into the budget, our Employee Recognition Committee had worked to do some recognition for Josh for his time serving as interim town manager. And I figured I would never be able to get him to come to a council meeting any other day unless there was a specific reason, like the budget. So we saved this out knowing that today would come. So the staff, Employee Recognition Committee had a plaque made up that said, Josh Tiffany, interim town manager 2023 to 2024 with gratitude from town and bay staff. So I'm on the forward and congratulations. That's he's going to make a Yes. Yes. So much. Well, hopefully that was a pleasant surprise for you. Yes, we've been saving that up for a bit, trying to find the opportune time. And so we're glad you're joining us this evening. So we'll dig into our budgets that we have on the agenda today, the first being the library. So this budget includes positions such as the director for $89,638, the assistant director for $66,072, the youth services librarian for $56,560, and some circulation assistants for $42,848, and two part-time ones at $26,940 each. I mentioned in the materials that we put out that Josh and I are going to work on a reorganization in the coming months of library staff with a recent retirement that we actually celebrated today. Thank you, Councilor Gass, for coming to celebrate the retirement of Darcel. She's been with the town for 22 years as the assistant library director, and Josh had a bunch of amazing words to say about her and how she supported him during the time as coming in as director and being director for about 10 years. So we will be working on that. We didn't feel like we had enough time to give it a thoughtful go to have in time for the budget, but we will ensure that it works within the staffing figures that we have proposed in this budget. And Josh can maybe present a rough idea that if you guys want to ask him about that. Other than that, the budget for the library is a pretty status quo budget where there's some increased in the office equipment line for some new furniture. And then also you'll see in the CIP budget some items later that we moved to the facilities budget to support some improved cameras and carpet in the library gathering room, which I saw today firsthand, and it's a desperate need of some repair and replacement for that. And so we've budgeted for that in this year's budget as well. Does anyone have any specific questions about the library budget, or would you like to hear from Josh about some of his ideas?
I have a couple of questions. I don't know if others do, and I would love to hear from Josh about what his long-term plans are for staffing. Yeah. Awesome.
We'll bring in, I also forgot to mention, for those following along with the electronic budget book, this is starting on page 48.
Josh, why don't you start with your staff plans, and then we can get into questions.
Yeah, so the staff plans are essentially that Darcel DeVay, again, after 20 years of service, is stepping down after very much, not overdue, but certainly well-deserved retirement. Mm-hmm. I know that in my heart I will never find another Darcel. So what I cannot do is say I'm going to try and replace her. What I can do is to say what I can kind of put together with the money that we have. And right now my thought is to put out again for a full-time head of circulation, which was again where Darcel got her start and then grew the position from there. That would not be paid on the same level that the assistant director is. With the rest of the money, I believe that I have enough to fund two per diem positions. One would be a programming coordinator, which we have not had. And again, Darcel has done the majority of the work on that. And that would be maybe like 10 hours a month, 10 hours a month all throughout the year, with cycles during times when we're booking authors or trying to get people in and also helping to run those events. And then additionally, an adult services assistant, and that would be primarily to help with cataloging the material selection and then keep up to on the website.
Oh, okay.
And I think with both of those, I can get in 420 hours, meaning it would just be the straight daily wage of the person and no extra benefits on top of that. And with that, I believe that I can come within the amount that was already designated for ourselves salary for the year. So it really is a revenue neutral proposal that would hopefully, again, ourselves that much, I would need 3 people to replace her. And I really think that is just underestimating what she has provided to the town.
Okay. Does anyone have questions? I mean, seems like a solid plan. I just had a question about the main InfoNet line item. Is that, I see that that's the same, it's maintaining the same cost as last year. Is that, I just wasn't sure if that was the Minerva.
Yes, so that is a combination. It is the Minerva annual membership fee. It's also the cost of the cloud library, which we get through main InfoNet, as well as data delivery. And that is the primary driver for the increases that we've seen. I think that I still don't know how when the last invoice is coming for this year, but the delivery costs through the system, I believed. I was Minerva treasurer last year and they said we can absolutely guarantee it would not go up by more than 15%. It ended up going 45% based on fuel costs and the lack of people who can actually maintain a statewide delivery system like we need for the libraries. So that is being felt throughout all of the Minerva libraries right now. Is just a way to keep books flowing and to keep the trucks coming and going.
Right. I remember you said that last year was an issue.
Yeah.
And that was, you know.
It's this year, I think they're just going to come and balance again, which is why I asked for no increase, but that's the best that I know so far. So those are just out of the control of anyone, but it's just the cost of doing business for a statewide consortium right now.
Right, right. Before I had one other thing, but does anyone else have?
Go ahead, finish it.
I remember we didn't end up funding it through CIP last year, but you had a proposal to revamp the basement space in the library. Is that still something that you see doing long term or?
Absolutely. It is just after last year was one of the first ones to be pulled after the first vote went down.
Yeah.
And this year with all the other things that were coming up, plus the kind of innovation, it just seemed like the time was not right for it. It was definitely, I showed our new town manager the space, and definitely that to be able to convert that into more publicly usable space would definitely increase both the community use of the library as well as support our ability to deliver programs while still supporting other organizations who wish for space.
Okay, yeah, I agree. It's probably not the right year for it, but I don't want to lose track of it because I do think it would be an important addition.
It is definitely reminded, definitely when the time is right, I'll be talking about to get the numbers up to make sure, and also have a more robust plan for kind of some final finishes for the basement, including things like a water fountain we don't have down there.
Oh, okay.
And get some more amenities into the room. So certainly that they'll become more into the 2020s versus the one we built for 2013.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Did anyone else? Go ahead. Dan.
Just a quick one. Josh, so I can answer this if somebody asks. It looks like only about a third of the book budget's been used. I'm assuming that's a timing issue.
That's coming it through, and also we thank communities for the plaque. It was also that me stepping away from the good part of this year certainly had its impact primarily on the ordering process, where I do a good portion of the ordering. Everyone else there definitely stepped up in order to keep the doors open, the wheels running. The book ordering is one of the things that kind of fell short on this year, which we had a wonderful budget, and I thank you very much, which is also why I thought it was good to be able to, with the book budget, that's certainly I like having our book budget, and with a reinvigorated children's services area and just generally more people coming in, I look forward to being able to serve their needs with that money.
Thanks for the explanation.
Yeah.
Anyone else? No? Okay.
Excellent.
Yeah, thank you. Josh. Yeah.
I'll just add, I'm very impressed with the library operation. I'm looking forward to also working on that project in that space. It seems like a lot of potential there to have more community space and to support some of the operations of the library. So we'll keep that on the front burner in years ahead. So that is it for the library budget. That will next bring us to the recreation budget, which those following along starts on page 49 of the digital packet. And so this, as I discussed in the beginning of the budget proposal, this budget for the first time will be added to the general fund. And so we plan to include this in the general fund. So this is our best estimate of where we think things will fall for the recreation budget. And so this includes positions, the director at $81,909, the assistant director at $56,646, various program staff, summer camp staff for an estimated total of $99,000, kids club staff for an estimated total of 150,000, leadership and training staff for an estimated total of 16,000, and other programs for a total of 69,531. So again, we brought this into the general fund as it's truly not an enterprise or special revenue fund because it's supported by other town departments and budgets, and I've got an analysis that I'll go over in just a moment. Again, these were best estimates for the new budget and will be refined in the future as we have better experience with both revenues and expenses. It does include program supplies that I've shown in the packet of 25,000 for the Kids Club, summer camp of 15,000, leadership and training 100,000, and other programs 9,000. And we made a few tweaks to that in the budget document itself to ensure that that's the area where we would experience challenges. So as we finalize the budget, we made a few tweaks to ensure that that is a number that we can work with, and we'll again make tweaks to that in the years ahead. So most of the programs are offset by revenues with different programs that may be coming and going. One of the things that we're going to do is continue to ask in the budget warrant to support special revenue and recreation. If Anthony comes up with a new program, most likely he's going to come up with a program that will be offset, so we can continue to bring in new programs throughout the fiscal year without worrying about our budget situations. And then in the future, we will reflect those in future years. New programs that we hope to keep long term, we'll reflect those in the budget. So then that way, if we do go over in recreation, we kind of have that approval to basically support new programs that we would cover the costs for as a whole. And so I did want to show the analysis of what basically we're forecasting in the budget for both expenses and revenues. So if you see, it kind of generates a $44,000 surplus, essentially, you could say, if you took the two line items together. But the budget, as you know, we pulled out of every department budget employment taxes, benefits, and retirement costs. So when you incorporate those for the employees and the estimates for all the part-time staff, that's a total cost of almost $38,000, $34,400. And then we've estimated a use of administration, HR, and communications and IT of essentially 3% of that budget, which we use to support them, a lot of it being finance related, but HR is heavily involved in hiring seasonal staff and things of that nature. And then communications and IT is helping us with spreading the word of different things. So that's a percentage of $42,000. And then facilities, and this is, I think, an extremely conservative estimate of 5%. It might be more than that, which includes utilities, maintenance staff, custodial staff to maintain the programs and fields and things of that nature for an estimate of $42,488. Again, I think that's conservative, probably in the area of 10 to 20%. And then capital that we've included for recreation activities in the upcoming budget. So it essentially shows a net deficit of approximately $200,000. And that's basically a way for us to be transparent, to show at the end of the day, the general fund and the property taxpayers of the town of Gray are helping to subsidize the program. But for an estimate $200,000, we're getting, over $500,000 of activities that are supporting the community and helping to keep people active. So I think it's an investment, a well-served investment. And so I think that the community will hopefully continue to support the recreation department in those areas. We continue our partnership with New Gloucester, with our Gray New Gloucester Recreation Memorandum of Understanding that we may or may not look to improve in the future. New Gloucester is very interested in partnering with us potentially at a higher level. And so I've discussed that a little bit with Anthony and the director in New Gloucester, as well as the town manager in New Gloucester. So we may have some future ideas to help enhance recreation programming for Gray New Gloucester. So with this budget, it is hard to compare apples to apples because we don't have a lot of apples to compare. We did try to bring in as much information from what we knew in previous special revenue budgets. So that is the budget as a whole. Then Anthony, did you have anything you wanted to add? Just to be available for questions?
Yeah.
Okay. And Anthony Dons, our recreation director, is here for any questions anyone may have.
Anyone? Questions? And
Could you talk about the program supplies those are new this year, that 50,000 is, and I see you've broken them out to kids club and summer camp and stuff, but it would be just helpful to get a little more rationale behind that spending.
Sure, that's not new, it's just now in the budget. So that would have been part of what was in our enterprise before. So a lot of this, you guys are now seeing what was part of the former enterprise budget,
Okay,
if that makes sense.
yeah, it does, yeah, thank you.
And even before this, the town had a small budget of about $60,000 that the town was carrying in the general fund to support rec. And Anthony described to me in years past when there was challenges, things were moved in and out of there to help manage, tax rates and things of that nature. So in this case, it's fully out there and transparent. And like I mentioned, we went through this exercise when I worked in Westbrook as well, because it was truly, not an enterprise revenue account. So a lot of these figures that you're seeing was all in those revenue figures and completely offset.
I had a couple questions. Did you have one, Dan?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, but you can go. I wasn't sure you had.
I don't mind.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'd strike the view then on that line, like if there's a future update just to the spreadsheet, then maybe put transfer or something there, just, I think so people don't. Misinterpret that.
Yeah.
The other piece is for councils have been telling the community for years that rec isn't paid for with property taxes. So I appreciate the fact that you presented it this way and made those costs more transparent. I don't know whether this will be an issue as we go further along or not. We'll just have to wait and see. But that's been the message for years and years, and I don't know. If we'll get any kind of pushback on that, we'll just have to wait and see.
And I would have to say that statement may have been correct. It just didn't take into account the other departments that supported, I think it balanced out if you just took exclusively recreation costs and exclusively, and I know that Parks and Recreation used to be a different budget and that got moved to facilities in years past. So I think that your statement may have been correct at times. This just shows the true picture.
Yeah, and I think this is much better.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I just had a question about the enterprise fund. So I don't know the history of the enterprise fund much, and I guess we're not legally bound to continue using that at all, or if we retire it, can we just retire it? I don't.
Yeah, so we'll in the accounting system, we'll stop using the enterprise funds and start making these general fund accounts. And so essentially, an enterprise fund is truly described as an operation that is truly funded by user fees at 100%. So for instance, a good example is a sewer operation, because the only people that use and benefit from the sewer are the actual users. It's just like the water district in the sense the water district is paid for by users. No other property taxpayer pays for the water district. So in the case of sewer, everything is paid for by users. The town, in some cases, the town of Bridgeton just started a sewer, and they have some town general fund subsidy to get the sewer system up and running, and then eventually let users who will be paying that and the debt service. And sometimes when those funds get up and running, you have that. But in this case, the enterprise fund, there may be other small enterprise funds that we may have in operation that are things that are truly 100% funded, but most of it is not. It's in the general fund. So there's no legal obligation. And like I said, we'll keep that. So if we're going to have Anthony comes to me with a new program that is going to cost $10,000, but he's going to bring in $10,000 in revenue, we'll handle those new programs as an enterprise fund to start out, and then we'll bring them into the general fund.
Okay, so we're not completely retiring that fund. We're just using it more exclusively for its intended purpose.
Definitely. And then I think in the future, as Anthony works with Gloucester more to better the programs, refine what they're charging for programs to try to cover costs, we may get to a point where these numbers shift, where the deficit essentially is not as large because they're generating more revenue with other programs in the future.
One other question I had, I'll come back to you again. was on the software line. I'm just curious what software we're purchasing for $6,000 and if that's new. And then also kind of a follow-up to that is would that not be more appropriate in the communications IT budget like we're doing with other departments?
So we try to have communications IT budget support softwares that supported essentially multiple departments.
Oh, okay.
Within the town. This is a specific software program, and again, this was one that was covered in the enterprise funds.
Okay, so it's not a new.
It's not really a new software. It's a
Maintaining
software-
what we.
Maintaining what we already have. That's what's it called?
So the software is called MyRec. If you go to our website, geniusrec.com,
Yeah.
that's the backside of it.
I see. Okay. Thank you. I just didn't know. It's hard to tell because it's all kind of being transferred, like what's actually new and what's not. So. I think
No, it's
next
confusing,
year.
but
Yeah, next year will be
less
clear.
confusing.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Ian.
Can you talk about, rec activities and involvement of community members broadly? I mean, it seemed, when I first joined the council, I think the focus was much more on kids, and it's my impression that you've done a great job of building the programming that is of interest to older folks as well. And can you just talk about, kind of numbers broadly of people who've been involved and where you see those trends going?
Well, I hope your impression is correct. We have put some effort there.
Yeah.
So when we're calculating our revenue, we kind of looked at the kids programs and the other programs, and we lumped all the other programs together, which included youth sports. And those revenues includes basically everything we charge a fee for. Now, there are quite a few programs we don't charge any fees for, particularly in the older adult arena. So things like, our lunches, we have grant funding for. People can't pay, those are covered. Or people can pay, they are charged $8 for the meal. We started playing bingo upstairs on Friday afternoons. That's been pretty popular and a lot of fun. We don't charge anything for that. And the local Lions Club helps us out with putting some of that on. So some community partnerships as well, are happening, and talking with, some of the churches around, and they're helping us with the lunch space, and, we may be helping them with their 250th celebration. So, there are some community partnerships. There's more of a focus on the older adult community, as well as adult programs that people are interested in. 10 years ago, if you asked me much about pickleball, I couldn't tell you much about it. Now, our gym's full currently with folks, and we offer that 6 days a week, and all of our sessions are pretty much filled up. So there's quite a bit more activity, yeah, and we hope to keep expanding, with the capacity that we have. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Dan.
Just another quick question about the revenue, Mike. When you talk about the revenue there, you're talking about the money that's coming in from the programming that the rec department does.
Yes, yeah, those are the fees collected for those specific programs. And in the case, given the split operation, those are Gray's share of the revenues. And Anthony and I work to try to estimate those based on past practice, and we'll look to refine those in the future.
The sub D account, I think, has always been a bit of a mystery to people, and it makes it sound like there's some other source of income. But that was just the resting place for the revenue that was collected from the rec department, correct?
I'm not sure how that operates. I thought the sub D fund was a fund collected from developers.
It is, yeah,
Yeah.
but for recreational purposes.
For
Yeah.
recreational purposes. So we haven't dug into it deeply yet, but that will be something that in the future, when we're looking to fund capital purchases or investments, that we would come to the council to potentially use that fund to support those types of things.
So that's why I'm just trying to pull apart the knot, that's all.
Yeah.
So we have this money from the
Fees.
and then we have this money that is from the developers. That money is specifically for recreational uses, is that correct, in that fund?
Well, I might be able to explain exactly how it works, but in the ordinance, and we have something similar in Westbrook, the developers who are unable to provide a recreational amenity as part of their development have to pay a fee in lieu of.
Yeah.
And so that fund continues to grow. I think last year you guys made some allocations from it to support the Douglas Field relocation.
Right.
And so I think in the past, there's been different things out there.
Ramp at Crystal Lake.
Yeah.
Some money from
But
there.
Doug can maybe best, where did he go? Oh, he can maybe best speak to how it's structured and collected.
Sure. Thank you, Doug Webster. So sub D, it's called sub D because in the old subdivision ordinance, it was sub D in the 08 subdivision ordinance. So anytime a new dwelling unit is created in the town of Gray and a building permit goes out for that new dwelling unit, there's a $400 fee that's assigned for that. It's dedicated to recreation and it has been used historically for a number of recreational purposes, including right behind you, the building and the amenities within it. So it's we actually call it, it's really not, shouldn't be, it's called a lot creation fee on the fee schedule, and that's not really what it is. It's whenever there's a new dwelling unit, that fee is applied. And for those that have been on the council for longer, there was a discussion at one point about increasing that fee. But the professional recommendation that we received at the time, because the town was not growing at the time, was that in population, was that we probably shouldn't be increasing that because we probably couldn't justify increasing that amount.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, again, I think just trying to, because it's such a big change, just want to try and make it as clear for people as possible how to connect all the dots. That's
I'll be working in the future to get my arms around that fund and explore potential increases, things of that nature to help increase opportunities for us to be able to fund recreation amenities in the community, because I think we need them.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have rec questions? No? Okay. Great. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you. Okay, our next budget is public safety. And for those following on the digital, it starts on page number 52 of the digital portion.
Did you want to do law enforcement?
Oh, did I have law enforcement?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, sorry.
We can go to public safety first. I just want to make sure.
No, I'll do law enforcement first, since that's how we had it, I think, on the agenda.
Yep.
I apologize for that. So, law enforcement is on page 55 of the digital budget book. And so this funds the, and then what is it for those? It's on tab 8 for those following with the budget book that we have. Tab 8, a few pages back. So law enforcement, this funds the cost of the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office contract, which essentially is 2.3 deputies for a total cost of $315,974. And as I discussed, I think I presented in a recent town manager's update that I've learned from the Cumberland County Sheriff's Department that this is grossly inadequate coverage for a community of our size, call volume and types of calls. They make us equivalent to Standish, which is similar in those natures. And they, at the beginning of this next fiscal year, Standish will have 8 deputies. And so in the years ahead, I'll be working to evaluate how and when we can increase our law enforcement coverage, and whether that be with the Cumberland County Sheriff's Department or resurrecting the old Gray PD. I'm not sure if that's something that we can consider in the future. And so we'll have to take a look at that and see what we can do to best serve the town. In the meantime, one of the things that I found to be concerning for a lot of residents is traffic complaints and traffic enforcement. Literally, I get a monthly report of calls for service that the sheriff's deputies respond to, and they're busy. They go from emergency call to emergency call. The number of, with the growing community, the number of domestic violence cases has increased significantly, and a number of mental health related cases have grown significantly. And so those usually are larger, more comprehensive cases that a deputy responds, and they don't just go break up the dispute and leave. It may involve somebody being transported to jail, maybe involve someone being transported to the hospital. And so those are very time consuming things. Given the benefit that we do work with the sheriff's department, if another emergency call comes in, we usually get other resources from the county to respond if they're responding to a high intensity situation. Having worked in that business before, they'll send a deputy to back up the deputy here in Gray. And so we have that benefit, and they have a supervisor and things of that nature. And then if the deputy is gone and there's an emergency call to service, they'll send somebody from one of the neighboring area patrol areas. And so we do have that benefit. But given the fact that one of the things that the deputies don't have a lot of time to do is, proactive traffic enforcement. And so I talked to the sheriff's department about their willingness to work with me to identify problem areas, that community concerns of the community, and hire details. So essentially, just like when a construction contractor might hire an officer detail, or the school might hire an officer detail for a football game or something like that. We're going to essentially hire an officer detail, and they'll probably be for 4-hour blocks, and we'll be like, have them post on Shaker Road and do traffic enforcement, and on Main Street and do traffic enforcement. And we hope that over time, we can either grow that or grow it with future law enforcement support to be able to show members of the community that traffic enforcement is taking place, and they won't know if and when it's happening. I'll also be working with the sheriff's department to maybe potentially adjust some schedules of the officers. Right now, we don't have a contract deputy. We only have them on Wednesday through Saturday. And so, it's 4 days, Wednesday through Saturday. And so I'll maybe be working with them to adjust the schedules to potentially have someone here during the day, during the week times, and maybe have the night person be on the weekends and things of that nature. So I'll be working with them on that based on the suggestions of some of the deputies who actually patrol the town. And with our extended hours at town hall, we also want to ensure that there's folks here in the later hours in the winter that potentially to closely respond should we have an incident here at town hall with some of our more extended hours on a regular basis. And so we'll be working with them to do that, but this will allow us, the requested details will allow me to work with the sheriff's department to position them in certain areas. And we hope that that will help to address some of the concerns. I think folks know in the community that we have limited law enforcement coverage. Folks that pass through the community know that we have limited law enforcement coverage. So it kind of creates a perfect storm of things to happen. And so we'll hopefully be able to help curb some of that with that. The sheriff's department also requires us to fund a vehicle for the deputy. So one is due for replacement this year of $72,000. So we don't have such a tough nut to crack in future years. I'll work to try to establish a reserve fund for a vehicle replacement. So that way we won't have that big chunk in every year. So if you look at it, it looks like we have a big increase in law enforcement this year, but it's simply to replace a vehicle. And they utilize those vehicles no more than 4 years or 120,000 miles. And then when they're done with the vehicle, they turn it over to the town. I don't know the status of some of them. I think our animal control officer might have one of the more recent ones. And we'll see what we can do to better use those if we can use them. Or I may work with the sheriff's department to see if they'll allow us to maybe have a small fleet that we have so deputies could respond, pick up a vehicle, and then use it. So that way we don't have to, as we grow the potential officer count, we'll have to grow vehicles with that too, and that's going to be a costly endeavor. I've been told it's to get up to running with a new deputy, it's almost $250,000 with the cost of the deputy, the training, and the vehicle and all the equipment associated with that. So that's to add $250,000 to this budget each year to try to add a new officer is going to be something that we're going to have to strategically do to ensure that we can support that. Given the fact that we're not even increasing our total budget to the property tax levy by even that much. So we'll want to make sure we are more strategic with that, and I'll do my best to navigate that with you all in the future. But that's the law enforcement budget in a nutshell. If anyone has any questions.
Yeah, he answered mine too. Go ahead, Matthew.
Just, so the increase from 283,000 and under 27 in 2024 to, I guess, what And then you're proposing to increase it to 434,016 in 1 year, so 53% increase. And that increase, as I understood what you were saying, is mainly from the increased details.
No, so the increased detail is one expense that's new in that budget. The vehicle is one expense that's new that you didn't have last year. And then if you look at where it says contract services, so I tried to, they had lumped in the vehicle like in the total. But if you look, last year, the contract services was budgeted at 261, almost 262,000. And this year, the budget is 316,000. The request was the total number because they lumped in the vehicle and I extracted the vehicle to be handled separate. So just for the coverage alone that we have, they increased by 20%.
And that's wages.
Wages and benefits and
So for existing,
just to maintain our existing operation.
okay. So the 53% is basically that increase
And those other things I,
plus the vehicle.
yeah,
What other things?
the other things I outlined, the vehicle and the details.
Additional detail.
The additional details.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so how much of that is the additional details?
Just $25,000.
Okay.
Dan?
I think, last year we had a presentation from County Sheriff's Office for our budget. And one of the things that was new was the body cameras that they were using. They had a grant last year. That grant was only for a year. They were to continue the program and pass that cost through to us. So I suspect that's also in here. It was in the neighborhood of 5,000 plus per deputy for the camera. And so I suspect that's another reason why
Yeah.
that contract number's gone up.
Yeah.
And that's built into the equipment that we provide for the deputy, and so thankfully that'll be when we hire, if we create a new deputy. But these costs, the increases, they told me they have the sheriff's department is subject to a collective bargaining agreement, and so they have some significant increases. For a long time, they struggled to recruit officers. There's times that the gray position didn't have a permanent person. It was essentially filled through overtime. And those are the times when we benefit because they're paying that deputy more and regular. They were down, I think, 10 positions in last year, and they said they're down to 1 or 2 now. So they had to make some changes in their labor contract to help be more competitive, which it's a competitive landscape for workers, especially law enforcement officers.
Yeah.
So that's the part of the 20% increase as well.
In the contract, yeah.
Matthew?
You mentioned that in future budgets, you might have a smaller contribution to a reserve fund, like every year, to fund for the vehicle.
Yeah, so what I might try to do is, so we've got the 72,000 here, I might try to keep that in there for multiple years. And that when a vehicle is due, we can draw from a reserve fund or lower that a little bit. So we can draw from a reserve fund versus having to pay for the vehicle upfront. And it creates a ripple effect in budget years, because all the vehicles aren't replaced at once. So if I establish a reserve fund that's close to that number, and the cost for vehicles keep going up and the ability to acquire them keep going up and the ability to get the equipment keeps going up. So, if we get a reserve fund that has, a couple $100,000 in it built up, then over time, when that $100,000 vehicle request comes in, we have the funds set aside and we don't have to do that. And in addition to us trying to prepare for a future of growing law enforcement coverage, every time is going to involve a vehicle. So if we try to start building the fund and how we handle that, we'll have more vehicles to replace in the future if we grow the deputies.
Would you put that in CIP or account for that?
So a vehicle of a lifespan like that of less than 4 years really isn't CIP. It's more of an operating expense. And that's where you get into the reserve fund strategy is better to manage that. So you have a fixed budget figure.
Yeah.
I've also taken that same approach to paving and the public works budget when we talk to that, because those are things that we have to do annually. So there's no point including the capital and or borrowing money for them because we have to do them annually. So the reserve fund strategy helps to get us that without having that blip in this budget like we have now of 72,000.
Okay.
Well, we've had trouble with fire reserve funds in the past.
Right, yeah, that's,
I think it's a great idea.
We'll better track them.
anyone else have questions about law enforcement? No?
I would just say that I don't need this for this year's budget, but as you think about adding other budget deputies and the comparisons to other communities, I'm sort of curious about why, I mean, like, what Standish's incident reports look like relative to Graves. I mean, there's some argument that if you have more deputies, they can make more arrests or traffic
Yeah.
stops and things like that. But I'm just sort of curious, I mean, why they feel like they need that many deputies and what they, you know, and why, what value they get from that. I think there's a real argument to be made that law enforcement ought not to be involved in calls for mental health crises, that they should be, you know, or, you know, mental health workers should be responding to a lot of those calls. And could, you know, I've done that kind of volunteer work myself. I mean, it was a long time ago when I was in college, but I spent years working on a hotline where we're just a mobile, we were just a hotline. We had cars and we went out in the community and talked to folks in crisis. And a lot of them had mental health crises. And when we needed to, we transported them to psychiatric hospitals, but sometimes we were able to resolve them. And so I question whether that's the highest, and whether I feel like in many cases, using deputies to address mental health crises makes them worse. And I just would be, I mean, I know that's much larger than us, you know, in terms of our town, but I think when they think about resourcing this work better, that's one of the things they should be thinking about.
Yeah, no, you're completely on point with that, and that's what a majority of communities are investing in mental health resources, and we did that in Westbrook a number of years ago and could use more, but we're working with what we have. And the sheriff's department has had mental health liaisons, but they cover such a large area, it's hard to staff enough. So they're looking to build a more robust, you know, mental health liaison division of their civil division of their department. You know, and how we participate in that will be part of our future investment in law enforcement. And or if we explore the route of developing our own police department, and part of my analysis, my brief analysis that I've done on this, Bridgeton, which is a similar sized town that also sees a lot similar. They have their own police department with, you know, 8 or 9 officers, and they also have, you know, a mental health liaison partnership with a nearby community up there. And so they have some of those resources that they can control and better manage. So that's why we're going to have to evaluate what the best scenario is for us long term. But if we only have 4 or 5 deputies that patrol in the town, I think one of the biggest things is having enough equipment for 4 or 5 deputies when you only have 1 or 2 that's on the road at a certain time. So that's where we might see some savings, but there'll also be some increased expenses. So we have to evaluate what those options. Would I love not to have a police department to have to deal with, and personnel complaints and all that stuff that go along with operating a police department that I've dealt with in other communities. It is nice to have the sheriff's department to have them handling all that stuff. So we'll have to evaluate what that cost is, but you're absolutely right that the focus is changing in law enforcement all around. And the sheriff's department is rolling with that, but they serve a unique geographic area that makes it harder for them to make like the investment that other communities have. Like Falmouth has one that they share with Yarmouth and I think Cumberland, and the person has regular hours, and they're at least an officer can, if they're not on duty and an officer responds, they can flag that for follow-up. So when the mental health liaison is on duty, they can follow up with that people and help to reduce the need for officers to be involved in those type of situations.
Yeah.
Usually officers are involved to support them, but I think as our community grows, that's something we'll have to consider.
Yeah, I welcome a more robust discussion about all this another time. I don't think I need to continue it tonight. Yeah, thank you.
It's definitely, you're on the right track.
Yeah, I would like to support a lot what Councilor Gass said, and I would definitely support the idea of some sort of innovative way, not volunteer, because it's, you know, important work that should be paid, well paid, but some sort of alternative to the law enforcement model for mental health response is something I would love to see us work on. And you know, from my own perception, you know, I have a little resistance to increasing the amount of police coverage. And I think there is something to to the idea that, you know, that if you have more police, there'll be more police incidents because, you know, there's more police. So I don't see any crime problem that concerns me to the level that I think we need more police.
You know, and this just might be one area where we want to create an ad hoc committee, kind of, I mean, the way we did with the fire truck, I mean, which was a big expense and to the community, and there was not a lot of consensus at a time, this was a few years back, about whether or not we should go ahead and buy one. It was like $1 million and there's no money in the CIP for it. And so they ended up creating an ad hoc committee, and I didn't serve on it, but I thought it seemed like a good process to me, because it allowed some, you know, more people to take a look at what the issues were and kind of run the numbers and hear, you know, different sides of the issue. So I'm just, again, that's a future discussion, but you know, rather than doing it all yourself, I think that might be a way to bring the community into that discussion, because I think it needs to be a broader one.
I think that's all important, and when we get to that on the list of priorities, it'll be tackled, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's certainly something I wasn't prepared to tackle in this.
No.
I figured that one small piece of details to help with traffic concerns that the community has. We have a lot of traffic in the community, and then some of the traffic safety investments that I have in the capital budget to try to help with those areas, but the rest of it will have to have a much longer term discussion.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's move on to public safety.
Yeah, so public safety begins on page number 52 of the digital budget book. And so this includes primarily our fire department, with the position of fire chief at $89,724, the assistant fire chief $71,064, the animal control officer at $16,900, and full-time staff for a total of $535,094, as well as per diem staff of $278,100, and call staff of $30,000, and overtime of $50,000. Similar to what we did in some of the other departments, the station facilities aspects have been moved to the facilities and parks budget. And then the hydrants, we're reflecting a hydrant increase estimated at 10%. And that you'll see when we get to facilities budget, we're estimating a 10% increase as well, per Gray Water District. I think I did share with you in the past that in some of my exploration of partnering with Portland Water District, there would be a significant savings in the budget for the cost for hydrant services. Portland Water District conducted a financial analysis of costs that Gray residents pay for water service businesses and the municipality. It's more and more evident to me that the town itself, the municipality, is subsidizing the Gray Water District substantially with this significant cost, which would be about $50,000 with the Portland Water District versus the nearly $300,000 that the hydrant management process is happening. And as you'll learn, over time in talking with the chief, and I've learned, the hydrant service in the community is certainly lacking. Essentially, recently we had a fire on Route 115 at a barn event facility, and it was a significant distance to get a hydrant to support just putting the fire out, not even being able to save the building and trying to protect the other buildings on the property. And so, potentially the mention that Portland Water District is interested in running a loop line all the way from Wyndham to Cumberland, we would pick up a tremendous amount of fire protection in the community for hydrants over time. And there would also be new ability to serve new customers in that, but we would have much better fire protection for a major thoroughfare that has a lot of development and stuff off of to support the community. So that was one of the things I identified as a challenge at the beginning of the process, our conversations with Gray Water District, and I'm doing my best to do those as diplomatically as possible. But there is some favorable information in terms for the town if we were to end up making a switch. And so hopefully that's something we can work out in the future. And then the fire chief is here to answer any questions that you may have specific, unless you had anything else you wanted to add.
Not really what you said, the fact that we used two water sources for that fire you mentioned. We used a hydrant in Wyndham at Smith Road, and we used the hydrant at Walgreens. So they made a loop back and forth. So that was quite a distance each way going through traffic. There was no saving that fire no matter where we went to.
It's real too bad. Too bad.
As they go.
Yeah, go ahead, Ann.
Will John Collins continue serving as ACO, even though he's deputy, he's now deputy?
He's the foreman at the Public Works Department, and he's still willing to serve in that role, and the Public Works Department is still willing to offer him that flexibility if there's animal emergencies during the workday. Otherwise, a lot of what he responds to is, evening and weekend disputes. A lot of it takes place on the phone, things of that nature. So he's going to continue to serve in that role. And him and I just talked about it recently as an inquiry from New Gloucester as they are in need of help again. And he's content continuing to serve Gray, given this new role, and we're not able to offer support to New Gloucester at the moment. But in the future, there may be an opportunity.
I had a few questions, but if anyone else wants to go first. Chief, I just noticed maybe Mike could answer this too. The per diem numbers on the spreadsheet were higher than what's in the PowerPoint slide. I'm just wondering which one was accurate. The PowerPoint says 278.1 and the spreadsheet's 295.
Yeah, I apologize for that error. I think that was as we finalized this budget, the chief and I were making a few tweaks to better support the per diem staff in addition to our full-time staff. So we made some reductions if you look, we made some reductions in where it says per call, that's essentially the call fire department. We made some reductions in those areas to better reflect usage, to better reflect actual usage, and added that to per diem lines. The difficulty with the fire service today, you probably had a call department at one time of 50 people, and it's a handful of people now. The volunteerism and the ability to have people respond is difficult to recruit. And it's not a unique Gray issue. It's happening all over. And so we have to work to better pay staff. So one of the reasons too for the increase over previous years is we're going to look to make a more competitive wage scale for per diems. And when we draft that competitive wage scale, we're going to work with our friends in New Gloucester so we don't, pick people we don't take people from them and vice versa. So we're going to try to better align that scale. So that's something the chief and I made in adjustments towards the end to ensure that we had adequate funding to be able to work on that.
Okay, so the budget year. So the 295 number in the spreadsheet is
that's the correct number. I apologize for the error on my slide.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I understood. That helps also to understand that you are supplementing some of the per diem increase with the decrease in the per call funding.
Yeah, and also just to mention the overtime isn't really, a lot of that is to cover emergencies.
Yeah.
Sometimes we cover to fill shifts for time off, but a lot of it is, if you have an emergency like we had, you got to bring everybody in, as many people as you can to help with that. And you have to have them sometimes stay over shifts and things of that nature to finish out calls.
Okay. And then Chief, I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the increases in both vehicle maintenance and office equipment. Just wondering what those
Office equipment, we need to start replacing some of the old hand-me-down equipment and like beds, office chairs, desks that we have. And vehicle maintenance, we haven't touched that line in 5 or 6 years. We were over the budget last year, and we just need to do it. Prices keep going up, trucks are getting a little older.
Mhm.
I just ran the price today for one tire on a fire truck, it's like $1,000.
Oh.
If you have to change tires, it's not gonna take long to use up another 10 grand.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I suspected as much, but
Yeah.
that's helpful just for people to hear. And then could you tell me what is the firefighting line item for $50,000? What does that mean exactly?
Some of these line names I'd love to change, but it would create all kinds of
Yeah.
problems for for trio. On that one, everything from firefighting tools to turn out gear that the firefighters wear. Pretty much anything doesn't fit in any other category, really. One of the biggest reasons we need to go up on that is because of the exploding prices for these different things. Turn out gear, coats and pants for firefighters. Those prices have literally exploded. Now, just a coat and a pair of pants is over $3,500 for one firefighter. It's crazy. And we have 2 open spots that would need to be filled either as soon as we can find somebody. So it's either going to be in this year, which is going to be rough, or next year. Next fiscal year was that's $7,000 more right there. It's insane.
What's the useful life of that turnout gear?
10 years
Oh, okay.
at the most. And then it has to be retired. And that doesn't include boots, gloves, helmet, anything like that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just didn't know what that entailed. It sounds like it's kind of the other category for your department.
Exactly.
Yeah,
In the future, we'll have better descriptions.
Sure.
of What's included in the
yeah, I know Trio doesn't always leave room for that.
transition year.
Yeah, and then Mike, I noticed under utilities, we took water out, which I know is going to facilities. And then, but I noticed that the fiscal year to date number under water was the same as the hydrant cost for the year. I'm just wondering, are those
Yeah, actually.
duplicate, are we paying those twice, or is it just repeating it? Is it kind of mirroring one another?
So the water under utilities, we would have moved that usage to
To facility
the facilities.
for
So
next year.
yeah, for next year, Justine might be able to help me with this one. Because here's the hydrants.
The hydrants are the
That's
same, the bottom line in that same.
Yeah, so those might have gotten looped together somehow in the accounting of what we do for billing. We're working on trying to refine that with these new processes, so I think that's probably kind of got looped together.
Yeah, that's what I figured, because it was the same exact number, but I just, yeah, I didn't know if we were paying it twice. So I wanted
And then
to-
I failed to mention in my initial report that we moved street lights and traffic lights. We have no idea why they were ever included in public safety. The public works department operates and maintains, and so those were moved to.
Right, I did see that. Yeah, figured that out. Okay, anyone else have questions? Dan?
Now, you asked most of mine. I
Okay.
one little one just again, so I can answer if other people ask. There's not a lot of accounts, chief. I don't think it's more than $15,000, but there's maybe 9 or 10 accounts where there's no activity year to date for the actuals, but we're budgeting the same amount of money next year. Are those like, there's one line is officers, another is AOS intercepts. One is EMA, I'm not sure what that is. Some of those totals is one.
Tolls is really in reserve for the ACO. We don't pay tolls as the fire department, emergency services. EMA, I kind of hold that to the end of the budget year. In case I don't have enough money for my budget. What was the other one you mentioned?
EMA, I'm not sure.
Emergency management.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And then ALS intercept, and that would only be used if you needed it.
Yes, if we needed that, if we never came up on the track and they by protocol, they have to have a permit. We would call either Cumberland or somebody else, and they're gonna charge us $300. So we're in the line for that.
Yep,
And if we don't use it, we don't use it, but if we do,
that's what it goes. Yeah, and I'm an issue with it. And again, I want to be able to explain it to other people. The same, I'm sure. Postage, I know there's still postage in your budget.
Yeah, so the facility's separate from the town hall complex.
Yeah.
We kept the postage line in there so that they can manage that, and we'll work to refine those in the future, but they tend to need postage separately from us.
And then because the ACO is in your budget, that explains why there's the money there if needed for vaccines and the rest of it. Thank you.
One of your comments just actually had me think of another question. So last year we had a contingency fund we set aside for any emergency disaster preparedness in case we need that. Is that, I didn't recall seeing that still in the CIP or anywhere. Do we know, do we have that set aside somewhere that we're aware of?
I don't know anything about that fund.
Okay.
Was it a fund balance set aside?
It was, I believe it was a contingency similar to the manager's contingency, but it was specific to emergency management needs if they arose. Yeah.
Justine and I weren't familiar with that.
Okay.
Again, it would be one of those situations we do, if we had a real emergency, we try to cover it in, the contingency that we have for the budget as a whole. Otherwise, we'd be coming back to you to say, this is the emergency we have, and we'd be looking for authorization if we have to do adjustments in the budget we're in to help prevent us from having to do a supplemental budget. We would work within the resources that we have budgeted to try to manage that emergency. Otherwise, there may be a need for a supplemental thing. If we have $100,000 repair on a fire truck or something of that nature, we would.
Yeah, I think it was less maintenance emergencies, but more like, if there was, God forbid, a tornado that went through the village, something like that, where we were.
Any major things like that, we would, one, we would probably have to make those expenses, but we'd be working with emergency management agency to get reimbursement for that, for any major incidents. So for instance, the storm that we just had recently, Tim had been tracking all the major repairs that we did, and Kurt will be working with EMA to see if there was enough damages around town to bring in those expenses together. If it reaches a certain threshold and a disaster is declared, then we can get reimbursed for a lot of those through FEMA. So a lot of those, we might be covering the initial cost, but they would be offset by revenue that would be following.
I remember that account you're talking about. I did my budget. I assumed it was in Nate's, the town manager's budget somewhere, but I couldn't tell you.
Yeah,
I'll try to look back.
Yeah,
I have to share my old forms. I can't recall. I don't know if you do, Dan, where we.
I've been trying to figure it out myself. There's several that have sort of gone missing.
Right, there was one for
That's
facilities.
what I'm trying to figure out.
And one that you asked about at the last meeting, I got to the bottom of when you talked about the document scanning. That was put into the budget last year. And when you guys went through the revisions of the
Did we
budget,
take
that
that?
was taken out.
Okay.
So maybe this is also an account that was put in the initial budget and taken
I'll
out.
have to go through my old documentation. Yeah, I can't, we went through so many
And
things.
none of the documentation I've seen, have I seen that?
Okay, yeah,
With that one, we have
facilities, there was a library one that I know you took out.
Yep,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Go
ahead, Matthew.
When you mentioned the difference between the slide and the spreadsheet for
A per
per
diem.
diem, I just checked the full-time personnel line too, and there seems to be a difference there too, right?
Well, the difference in the full-time personnel line is a contractual change as part of the labor agreement that we have.
I'm talking about the difference between the spreadsheet and the slide.
Oh,
The figure listed in the slide. I think.
Well, so
The fire chief, there's fire chief and the assistant fire.
Oh,
chief.
yeah, those are all together. I just broke those out to show you, and then those are just regular full-time staff. So the ACO, full-time staff, assistant chief, and fire chief equals that 695 number. but the other one was an oversight, so I apologize for that.
Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Chief, remind me, for part-timers, is overtime after they're part-time or after 40? Oh,
Per diem, you said?
no, for part-time people work more than their part-time hours.
There is no part-time positions budgeted.
With the,
My guess is what yeah.
if the Fair Labor Standards Act would require us to pay them overtime after 40 hours.
Yeah. Full-time and paid
Their overtime, I think, is after 48,
42.
42.
Okay. I was just trying to remember what that number was.
Yeah, it's different than the firefighting law enforcement fields.
Okay, thank you.
43.
Any other public safety questions? No? Okay. Thank you, Chief.
Chief. So our next one is Public Works, and so this is on page,
57.
would you say
57.
page 57 of our digital budget book? Let me get to the slide. Okay, and so the Public Works budget is, this is seeing the most change from reorganization in addition to the facilities, but it's essentially a status quo budget. The positions include the director of $85,000, $85,280, the foreman position of $63,544, the mechanic of $60,570, light equipment operators of 6.5, which total $341,825. The 0.5 is essentially a new position to start January 1st. And my proposal behind that is, the community continues to grow and we need services, but our Public Works Director also has a snowplow route. And we would like to try to work to get him off of the snowplow route so he can manage the crews and do director responsibilities and supervision during winter time. So we're proposing to do that. That allows us to get a new position in the budget, but not have to put the full year of the position in the budget. And then we have the part-time administrative assistant at $12,416 and seasonal plow drivers that we have ×3 at $33,422 each. And so from an accounting standpoint, having the summer winter roads breakup was an accounting nightmare. When that is done and how that is handled. And so we're essentially combining everything into a single Public Works Department budget, as you'll see with all the changes. And so we try to keep all the old lines there so you can see all the old lines and kind of see where everything is moved. I also added the annual paving to the operating budget, which essentially will be a lot like the vehicle thing that I talked about, a reserve fund. So we'll establish a reserve fund, a contribution to a reserve fund of $700,000, which is what's in this budget. And that will allow us to do whatever paving we can within that fiscal year. And then next fiscal year, we'll add to that reserve budget because it's an ongoing expense that we need to do on a regular basis rather than make it subject to capital, or if ever down the road we didn't have capital resources, we borrowed for it. This way it would be in the budget. This is a good tool. If we have difficult budget years, we can make some adjustments in things that don't adversely affect employees or operations. And it's just would be something that we'd have to explain to the public. We're going to have deferred maintenance on our roads. And so we have that in the operating budget. We also maintain consulting engineers in the budget as we work to establish the town engineer. Some depending on what we get for a skill set of an engineer. I think I talked about this in the last meeting. We may still need some consulting engineering services, so we want to maintain that until we got settled. We did increase salt usage, but we are seeing an increased price at the same time, but we decreased it a little bit because we literally at the moment are fully stocked in salt. given the light winter that we've had. And Tim, as long as he can get deliveries, if we use any in the coming days and weeks, he will get refilled. And so we'll probably be turning in a significant amount in this year's budget for salt usage. So we kind of made that adjustment for a future year as well, knowing that our goal is to go into next winter fully stocked with as much salt as Tim can fit in the storage.
There isn't much room.
And then we also,
Is that, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
is that why we also eliminated calcium chloride?
so we eliminated calcium chloride because it's not something that they use anymore, and he can best explain that.
Okay, we can talk about that later then, that's fine.
And I think that was all of the major points to talk about with Public Works.
Oh, sorry, Dean, go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, on the budget for roads, in years past, we've always got a schedule of what roads we're gonna be paving with the money that was there. When we have our, engineer report for our roads and the conditions report, basically, and there's as long as I've been on the council, I've been trying to put more money in the paving budget because the idea of using it, to be honest with you, as a sort of a shock absorber for the rest of the budget makes me a little nervous. I think we need to stay committed to paving the roads we have because repairing them, the ones that we've had to repair, it's just that much more expensive than if we don't keep them maintained. So I guess that's my little PSA for that one. And then, I was just curious about the calcium chloride, because it's my understanding.
Yeah, we haven't used it in almost 3 years. Of course, warmer temperatures, you don't need it. And we have 2 2,500 gallon tanks that are still 3/4 full from 3 years ago. So,
Weren't we applying that in certain parts of town versus?
no, I use a special magnesium chloride salt on my route, which is Route 26.
Yeah,
The bypass, Lewiston Road, which you use less of because it has the magnesium chloride in it.
do we know, is that solving or preventing that issue from becoming bigger? Do we
That
have any feedback?
salt works twice as good as just the regular straight salt.
But I mean, it also happens to be a more expensive than.
It most certainly is. It most certainly is, but you use less of it too.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Councilor McGuire, the schedule of roads to be paid was included in the capital budget request.
Yeah.
So you can see it in the back. I don't have the page number handy, but it shows what roads, and then I reported that we moved it to the operating budget. And I agree with you, I would never want to use it as a shock absorber, and I'd like to increase it. But sometimes if we have difficult budget years, with significant reductions in revenue, and we don't want to eliminate positions, sometimes those are the difficult decisions we have
The
to make.
choices have to make.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
I just had a question, I have several questions, but I'll start with this one. With the overtime budget, we're increasing that by $6,600, but we've only, and I know the weather's been weird this year, but we've only used 4,600.
600 of that is for the full-time mechanic. 6,000, that was from the summer roads that were trading.
Yeah, we combined some roads, some.
It's the same as last year.
Okay,
Yeah.
so do you think we need to continue to fund it at that level if weather is similar to this year? Okay,
Yeah, the way things have gone.
okay,
I'm glad that last year we increased my summer overtime because of all the heavy rain events.
oh, that's true.
I've actually spent over half of that now, and we still have.
Okay. Yeah, so you're responding less to snow emergencies and more to just
Responding more
other
to emergencies.
water. Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
For this year, anyway.
Right, well, that might continue.
And that is something, there's average response with snow removal. We can have a year where we have 20,
Yeah.
village snow events. And if we have those, we gotta plow them. And sometimes those overtime budgets in public works, you can blow out of the water.
Mhm.
It's all.
It could be totally opposite.
Yeah.
Good job if you could.
And then I noticed that the private road public
Yes.
winter maintenance easement price went up again. Have we,
Contracts are up
That was gonna be my question. Have we gone out for
So-
RFP?
Not as of yet.
Okay.
Because we're still currently, they still have another month left, so we can't really do anything until after. And I can tell you, I put more in there,
Yeah,
but it may not be enough.
okay, because I know it went up the last time I did it
Yes.
significantly.
And it's something Tim and I talked about considering in the future. We don't have any obligation to necessarily maintain those private roads, though they have been for quite a while.
Well,
So we could work on a transition cycle to those private road associations over time.
yeah, that
That would be a
that
tough
was
discussion.
politically sensitive, probably.
It will be sensitive, but it's something that,
It would be, but if you look at the 10 surrounding towns around us and ask each one of them towns who plows private roads, 95% of them gonna say,
Right, it's my understanding, it's sort of a unique situation to the Sebago Lakes region. But it is kind of a grandfathered process here.
and I can't even guarantee I'm gonna get to bid this year.
Right, I know you only had one person bid
Yeah.
last time, so.
that's
And I surely don't have the crew to take care
I'll
of
be
some of these routes.
Yeah.
So the problem might fix itself if
It-
nobody's on it.
I might. And then I'm just wondering, the salt, are we still purchasing that through GP cog, and have they gone through their pricing?
They have not, and that's the problem every year,
Yeah,
because when I try to budget, I try to go up a little bit every year, but I never go up enough. But like Mike said, with the mild winter we had, I put as much salt as I can into the shed, so we were able to decrease that by a little bit, because I put it up to $75 a ton, because I'm paying 73 right now. So I boosted that up to $75 a ton by the average use of 3,960 ton a winter. So,
okay, it sounds like we have enough if we, even if we're just purchasing a smaller amount this year, so. Anyone else? First, Dan?
So, the interlocal agreement with Wyndham that's listed in here, we have one with Raymond too. correct?
yes, we do. We actually offset. We plow, North Raymond Road from the town line up to Pond Road.
Yeah,
And then they plow the town portion of Brown and Gore.
yeah. I just wondered,
So it's actually, it's
It's an equal.
an equal, so nobody owes no cost.
yeah, I just don't know if it should be. No one would know that, I guess, unless you knew that, you know, it doesn't show up.
A lot of people know, because they always.
Yeah, I know,
It is an interlocal agreement, it's just not
Yeah.
budgeted for.
just.
It works out well, actually.
With that, yeah, I have no issue, yeah, about that at all. I was just.
That's
looking at the Raymond one.
Yeah, there's no argument to be made for, having it in, just so that people remember that it's there, right? I mean, if you got hit by a bus or, it's a reminder that we have that arrangement.
Maybe in the future, we can upgrade the budget line to just say interlocal agreements. We can, and then break it down, Wyndham X, Raymond 0, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Just a thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
Anyone else? Yeah, I am curious to see how it works with the paving being in the operating budget. I think that's a large adjustment for us here, so. I see what you're saying though about it being an ongoing cost and not.
I know last year you would ask me about chip sealing,
Mm,
and chip seal only lasts 5 to 7 years. Paving, we go 10 to 12. It's about half of the price, so you're not really saving.
I knew last year tried it this year and I just
Yeah.
wondered,
Yeah.
I've seen it in other communities.
I think our best bet is to stay on the route we've been going.
yeah, just as someone who's driven on a chip sealed road in New Gloucester, I'd much prefer
Yeah,
the paved road.
I grew up, yeah.
Yeah, it's not very pleasant.
And the ongoing cost for paving that you mentioned, it just takes it out of the capital budget and puts it into the operating budget, so it reduces our capital budget, because really it is an ongoing cost, and that can be something, depending on who's here and what difficult decisions we have to make, we
Right.
can decide to maintain it, or we can decide to adjust it. Well, I mean, it'll be able to Councilor McGuire's point, to grow that in future years, when, and that's also places when we have revenue growth in other areas that we don't have we don't have other areas we need to grow in the budget, such as positions and ongoing costs. That's an area we can grow in the other direction and more, to balance off the budget, in order to make a responsible budget for the taxpayers and also responsibly invest in our infrastructure.
Yeah, and I was happy to hear you say that you treat it more like a reserve fund where we could carry forward costs that we don't spend.
Yeah, if we put 700,000 this year, we might only be able to get to pave roads that are, valued at 600,000.
Yeah.
So then it stays in there. The next year we can produce 700. So then whenever projects get deferred, just because of construction timing and schedules and weather, they can then continue to manage those projects, and we don't have to worry about a carry forward of the capital line or anything of that nature. But this will be an ongoing fund that grows over time, and as we can contribute to it, sometimes we can't get everything we planned done in the short construction season we have here in Maine.
Yeah, that's happened to us before. We used our capital fund as a reserve fund, essentially. I think it's pretty clear that from an accounting standpoint, time has moved on, but Gray has not. So making these changes would make a lot of sense, I think.
I don't know the plan on Yarmouth Road, but that is nickel and diming me to death right now.
I can
I have, since December, between Lewiston Road and Yarmouth Road, I've spent $5,500 on just patch. We really need to do something with Yarmouth Road, whether we put a half an inch down just to get us by for 3 or 4 years until they redo Yarmouth Road, but we really need to do something.
Saskatoon DOT.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. No,
They may do some stuff like that. We've been successful with some of those requests in.
Yeah, I mean,
Westbrook.
I would approach them, given that they know this project is, put on hold because we're trying to seek other revenue sources from the federal government, and they know that it's in really bad condition. Yeah.
After every rainstorm we go through, who knows how much
They
paint.
can do a thin overlay.
Right.
That they might be able to
Or
incorporate.
at least maybe they could pay for a portion of it or something where we could, not,
Or when they do the North project, maybe they can just skin.
I just wanted to
yeah.
put that on your radar because it's really gonna get worse.
Yeah, I've had that thought driving down it, that it's pretty rough, and if this is another 5 years out, that's.
I don't know if any of you have written down Lewiston.
Yeah, I have, yeah.
It's terrible.
It's,
Is that on the 26th?
26, yes, and there's no way that road's gonna last.
No, it's bad,
Well, there's not enough money in what we get from the state, as part of the urban compact they don't take into account the condition of the road when they compute that number.
I mean, I get complaints about miles. I'm not kidding you. 2 guys will spend half a day between Lewiston Road and Yarmouth Road after every rainstorm. And I have to call and order more patch. I've got 2 pallets of patch on order now because we're almost done. So that's something.
I mean, do we need to be budgeting for that? Are we budgeting for that? Unexpected costs with
We should have enough in the summer roads account.
Okay.
Handle it. It'll be close, but because I still have some paving projects to do this spring.
Yeah,
We work better for those in the future.
yeah, and also just maybe we could have a
DOT.
conversation about with something related to DOT.
I have a couple of things I gotta complete with them first before I.
Right, I know.
Right.
I'm aware.
Right in. Yeah.
Okay, any other public works?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, thank you. So that brings us to solid waste and recycling. And that position, budget is on page 62 of the digital packet, and it's just after Public Works in the notebook, under the same tab 9. And this budget includes the director position of $76,891, the assistant director, $56,217, and transfer station attendants, was about 6 of them, which totals $220,196. And then in this budget, just because I couldn't find a perfect place to put it, we included $10,000 for a GP cog resiliency fellow that I mentioned at our last council meeting in regards to help support the resiliency committee and some of their efforts that they have. We'll be looking to, as part of the grant that the resiliency committee is applying for, reflect this as a match and maybe even get more money from the grant to apply to this, that we may or may not be able to have two of them. So we will see what that budget and what that total cost is from GP cog, and that's and then the other budget lines, tipping fees increased. I also desired, the resiliency committee was to add some food composting. So we've got an estimate from Garbage to Garden to place some of their like green bins that they have in different places with some signage to allow for some composting drop-off locations, potentially here at Town Hall and at the transfer station. And so those ultimately cost money. They may have limited impact on the reduction of tonnage, but that we'll see if that's something that we can implement and get set up here and maybe implement slowly and see how it's received, and then increase the amount of bins over time if that's something that we can do. I also learned from a partnership with EcoMaine that they do have a system they're going to be unveiling in the future where there's a green bag of some sort that you can buy, collect compost, and throw it into your regular household trash. And when the household trash gets dumped at EcoMaine's incinerator, there's a robot that pulls that out. And because they want to get that food waste out of the incinerator stream, and it then gets sent to is it an anaerobic composting facility that is in New Hampshire. So it gets hauled out by the robot and sent to that. It doesn't change the tonnage when you drop it. So it doesn't take it out of the waste stream like we would with these bag systems. But so that's something that as EcoMaine starts to educate their member communities more about, that may be something that we can explore with residents as well in the future. And then the equipment repairs and rentals continue to increase in this budget. Other than that, it's fairly much a status quo budget. I did mention at the outset of my total budget proposal, we may have to consider how we handle solid waste and recycling in the future. Recycling specifically under the extended producer reimbursement program. There is states collecting fees from people who generate recyclable materials, and therefore then sharing those costs with municipalities for the cost to process recycling. And as part of that comes a data collection mechanism, which we don't have the equipment for at our transfer station, where there's barcode scanning and things that go along with recyclables. And EcoMaine is currently building a new recycling processing facility in preparation for these new requirements. So we may have to consider in the future sending our recyclables to EcoMaine, either being collected at the transfer station and or potentially collected curbside, if that's something that the town wants to do. This will be something that I will work with the resiliency committee to help us evaluate the different options to see what's best in the future. But as part of that extended producer responsibility, they help with both the disposal and the collection costs. So the more affordable our operation is, essentially the more money we're leaving on the table to help with the collection and processing costs. So we may have to look at that and weigh those options in the future. Either way, I think ultimately there would be a hybrid approach, like some of communities that have transitioned to curbside recycling, where curbside collection, where we would have, some subset of the transfer station to handle certain things, and then potentially that collection, and we'd have to establish, who we're going to collect for, put limits on unit numbers and things of that nature, which will be a transition item. We're probably going to have to tackle that as part of next year's budget. And so I'll be working with the committee to do some of that analysis this year with the support of EcoMaine.
Okay. Yeah, just to be clear for those watching, nothing to be changing at the transfer station this year. It would be.
Those are just future challenges.
Yeah.
And our director, Randy, is here to answer any questions anyone may or may not have.
Anyone? Go ahead, Dan.
Are there specific repairs for that line that are on deck to happen, or is that an ongoing or equal?
If you want.
Yes, what's the line are you referring to? Equipment repairs, just the bottom of.
Yeah, but I'm gonna fix maybe some hydraulic repairs. It needs an overhaul.
which is 16,000.
Is that,
That's on the advice of town's mechanic.
yeah,
Who's chasing leaks constantly.
is that another thing that we should see happen more frequently, or? I mean, it sounds like, is this maintenance that has been deferred, or is this an older piece of equipment that just needs more care and feeding?
Well, I'd say both,
Okay,
but it's definitely an older piece of equipment that's wearing out. But it's not like we can buy a new one.
well, I guess that goes back to Mike's conversation about potential changes. I mean, it sounds like we're either gonna have to make some changes or we're gonna have to buy a new piece of equipment in the future. So I don't know if, you know, what the price of that piece of equipment would be and when we should start saving for that.
Well, generally, Public Works gets a new one and we get.
Yes, yep.
Once they wear it out.
You'll see in the capital request as well, there was two items that I deferred, knowing that we have to conduct that evaluation.
Okay.
Because if we decide we're, you know, I've been in some discussions with our friends in Yarmouth who have continued, they've opted to not go to curbside collection, but they've changed their recycling operation to send their recyclables to EcoMaine. So either way, we're gonna have to invest in some way, in some form or fashion, whether it be in the transfer station more or in curbside collection.
Thank you.
Yeah, similarly, Randy, if there was quite an increase in equipment rentals, is that a one-time thing, or those anticipated that those will be increasing year to year?
That was part of the bid that we received from Casella Waste. And they were the only bidder,
Oh, okay, okay.
and they did a significant increase on that one.
So that's probably gonna be an increase next year
It
also.
will be 5% year to year.
Yeah, so the council authorized before my alignment with contract, the bid and the contract with Casella, and we're
Yeah.
finalizing that right now. And I'm getting some language in there to get, afford us the ability to renegotiate that if we are to make some operational changes. And they're amenable to that, and we'll be finalizing that agreement. But this, to Randy's point, this locks it in, so we'll know what the increase is every year. We won't have to go out to bid if we continue to operate as we are now.
And then there's $1,000 budgeted for advertising. Just wondering what that is for.
Is that a line we moved from somewhere, Justine?
It-
It was resiliency committee that we moved in.
Yeah, they might need to utilize that for
Yeah.
composting, education and things.
Well, the Irish Garden includes that in their price estimates.
Oh, they do.
Some education, but
Okay,
yeah, that was moved from the resiliency committee to include that there.
okay. And do you anticipate they might utilize that this year?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it could be some mapping help or, other, educational and engagement work. A little bit depends on whether we get this grant we're applying for. So there'll be more resources available then if we get this grant. So it may be the 1,000 maybe less critical, but it's nice to have a little bit of change.
Yeah, a cushion.
Yeah, if we don't get that grant.
Okay. And then Randy, I noticed the part-time position budget went up quite a bit. Are we hiring some new or hoping to hire some new individuals, or is it just an increase?
So we used to have, there was a per diem line and a part-time line, and
Oh, right.
those, I think there was some confusion in the past about which line was which, and we combined those. So that's,
I see that.
that's the need of the, that's the, so we just made it just part-time and we eliminated the per diem. You can see that.
I see that now. Yeah. Okay. I think that was all my questions. Does anyone else? Dan?
Well, more of a comment, I guess. The going away of sort of the council and boards section there, I mean, this is kind of it's not a lot of money, but when I saw advertising, I didn't think resiliency committee at all. The council and boards doesn't amount to a whole lot of money, but it does feel like we lose sight of what it's for in instances like this. I don't know.
We'll look to properly rename them so we don't lose sight of them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the resiliency committee's charge does directly support the transfer station work, so I don't think it's inappropriate to have it in the budget, but for transfer station costs, but I see what you're saying, so I think if we relabel it, that would go a long way to helping us understand.
Yeah, the resiliency committee's work actually in the next year, especially if we get this grant, is gonna be able to look with more watersheds. So, yeah, right, so I'm not sure this is, maybe it does make sense to pull it under even administration or something and have a subset of the committees, because each committee does have usually have some modest budget in the $500,000 range.
Well, most budgets are, kind of department specific. This resiliency was the hardest one.
Yeah.
Identified department specific, but
Yeah.
maybe we can, before we finalize the budget, we can make that move to administration. And just to have a resiliency line, we can incorporate the fellow and the advertising.
Yeah, that does make sense, at least, for this year in particular.
Otherwise, like the committees that we have, usually they're specific to a certain department. And mixing those lines together, the advertising needs to happen for planning board, the advertising needs to happen for zoning board. So those reflected in those specific department budgets makes more sense. This was the hardest one to find a proper placement for.
Okay.
I just have a quick question, and I apologize for not having tracked this better, but I know in the past there's been some work slotted for or planned for like preventing rain and snow shedding off of that roof, the overhang there. Are there other kinds of facility repair needs that you see are needing to be done? Did those get done, I guess? Did that problem get addressed specifically, the rain and snow shedding off that roof? And then are there other sort of big ticket repair needs that you're looking at?
The building floods.
Yeah.
Every time it rains.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
But that's in this year's
Right.
budget with, well,
Yeah,
Okay.
we did budget for that.
Okay,
in
that's right.
FY25.
we address both of those.
All right,
Both of those,
right,
yeah.
that's what I thought, and I just was wondering where we were in that process. Thank you.
Yeah, I've witnessed those issues firsthand in my visit to the transfer stations.
Thank you, Randy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mike, before we move on, if we could just take a 5-minute
Absolutely.
bio break kind of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, so let's take a quick break. We'll resume at 7:17 PM.
Oh, the next one is the. My gosh, the CIP, just the three of us. First, to be. And it's not. I think notes of yours. Before you retreat. Well, I have it here. This is sure.
Yeah, so they want to have scheduled.
But.
Yeah, this is. We would just see in the future. People get a chance to do that. Okay.
Because there was a certain search kill you, that I found this, and so.
Before we go put it in the CIP, we have the funding, but we put it in the CIP.
And then really was duplication or something.
So that way there's no.
Actual rate.
I want to be over there, some.
Basically,
in that.
I was saying.
Be able to cover. So.
And then later.
If I had to put money out of the source of the spouse, I want to take care of that.
Coincidentally, it's gonna be.
We're gonna put it in because every year, when just the budget starts, we're gonna immediately transfer that to a paving share.
So.
It's gonna be recorded as a transfer like up back. So then we can paving reserves on, and we'll carry forward.
They're not the
whole automatically. And then if we get added to, it gets subtracted to.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, I'm talking to you.
I saw it. Whether we should be. Somebody next year. I saw not leaving. That's what you should do if you should. Oh, what you want to do.
Oh, you mean the scholarship?
Yes. This is gonna be awful.
We're so thankful for that.
And I found the thing is like, he doesn't have a little bits of this. Yeah, we can teach it on. It's like so.
I'm sure it's fun. The ones that were young, it's like.
That's what he didn't know was that he long for us to see about. Never heard that.
Then we got the Russell Scholarship Fund, and then the Fulton Fund, there's three different.
So that's back there, thankfully.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's with the families where it had a scholar, that was listening. It's like, listen.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when I searched the share their part, because I know, everything. Yes. So first I was so I first had very much volunteers and sleeping order. So I just searched the share for and put the verification of my closed. So that I think gave me spreadsheets that were right there. So I'm just wanting that search, but all I have right now is like click on it and
Is it?
I'm gonna run around here.
It's the contract service. You're staying. Yeah.
So,
Well, like I said, we can always on things. Yeah. Oh, yeah. What was the past? Everything else, I didn't break my, everything he was like. I would break my, check on that.
Great, we'll continue. So we're on to facilities and parks, which I know is a fairly new combined department for you all. This is on page 64 of the digital budget book and on tab number 10 of the notebooks that we have. And the facilities and parks budget has undergone some major changes, similar to we had on some of the other budgets. But this position includes, or this budget includes positions of director for $83,575, assistant director of $61,809, laborers at 2.5 for a total of $135,817. And this is very similar to what I proposed at Public Works. It's a half-year position to start January 1st for a new position. I failed to mention when we talked about Public Works last year, there was some hybrid position that potentially was created that didn't quite work out, and with different schedules and things like that. So this kind of is replacing that in a sense. We'll try to bring in a position with growing facilities where we've moving facilities down to the former fire station, the Turnpike Acres site. The manual arts building is being upgraded for recreational space. We're going to be working on long-term repairs for the lab building. So our facilities footprint is growing, and so we need more staff to support all that. And so that's why we're starting to do that half-year position. And then we also have a custodian for $44,562. This budget also combines all facilities related items such as utilities and maintenance. Those are managed all together with the support of the facilities director and finance. So they work on managing those contracts. We do have a water increase of 10%, again, per the Gray Water District. We actually don't know what their increase is yet. They haven't put that in, but that was a rough figure that was provided to us. And so we also created a capital maintenance account for small repairs and equipment for each different facility and operation within this budget. And so you'll see when we get to capital, there was a number of basically more maintenance type repairs, capital maintenance repairs that we move to the operating budget. So we can continue to have capacity in the operating budget to make those repairs versus including them in capital when they're kind of ongoing maintenance issues that we need to address. And then we have some equipment, new equipment for the department that we included from capital. With a new leaf blower and water reel, leaf blower to help us better maintain trails and some of the properties, outdoor properties that we maintain, and the water reel to help us with irrigation on some of the places that lack irrigation systems. And so if you continue on to the next slide on my page, we have the various capital maintenance items for each budget identified here at the Pennell Building. In addition to general ongoing repairs, we have we're doing an access control conversion and some additions to access control here for an estimated budget of $30,000. The system we have now is at the end of its useful life, and that needs to be replaced. We'll be working on replacing the staff door at the far end of the building that's currently nearly failed. An exterior security camera here at the Pennell complex, and elevator repair and access control for 7,800. In the public safety building, we have general repairs, and we're also doing the access control conversion project there. At the library, general repairs, as well as the large meeting room carpet replacement, and also some camera replacements of the existing systems. And then we're also doing some access control conversion at the facilities and parks department, the new facility on Turnpike Acres Drive. And so that is the facilities and parks budget in a nutshell. It's pretty much status quo otherwise, other than the capital maintenance lines that we changed to best support and manage those in each one of these departments, as well as the potential addition of a half-year position to work into this department. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Mel? No? Are there any questions for everyone?
Go ahead, Ian.
Well, I have a couple questions. One is for the staff door replacement, you know, 7,000 seems like a lot of money. Does that include labor, or is that just the door itself?
So the construction of the door, it's the labor to install it, and the access control has to be reinstalled.
Okay,
So,
that makes more sense.
yeah, that's the door we are not gonna do ourselves. That one's being hired out.
Okay,
Right, and we deferred that last year when we were making cuts after the budget failed, so I think it was in pretty rough shape last year.
I looked at it as I came in tonight, it's like covered with rust and
Yeah,
that's not
It's
good.
cumbering
Yeah,
as we speak.
yeah. The new question, and this is sort of more broadly for the town itself, not unique to your budget, except that the electrical has ended up in your budget, I think, right? For all the facilities.
Yeah, so we worked to put all the utilities within one budget and manage them under each facility.
Right,
And that was kind of a better system, because it's one of those things that each department doesn't have an effect on that.
right,
It's difficult for them to manage, and it'd be better to have it in one budget that we can manage collectively townwide
right.
with the support of facility staff
Right.
and also our finance.
Yeah, I got that. My question actually is about the municipal solar array, and I'm just, I mean, when we approved that, we understood that it would pay for like 90% of our municipal electricity costs, and when I looked at, I'm not sure I got them all, but I think I did close to the electrical budgets across all the buildings were like $66,000 and change. And I'm just wondering, are we getting the benefit from the solar array? You know, do we need to install more? I mean, like, is our electrical usage increasing? Is it just CMP's fees are going up? What, you know, maybe some combination?
So I think it was a combination of a few things. So that doesn't pay for the delivery and transmission charge.
Yeah.
So we still have to pay that share of the CMP responsibility. And that's they call it net metering essentially. So it offsets. I've seen some of the reports in looking through old town managers' emails, but I don't have the complete grasp of how that's generated and how that's applied. So as Justine and I get finances in order, that'll be one of our priorities to best understand how that's being applied. But I would aim to guess that if we didn't have that, our electrical costs would be much higher
Yeah.
than they are.
Yeah, and I mean, two things. One is there's room there, where those are located, there's room to expand. So if we're not covering our municipal costs, perhaps we should consider expansion. And secondly, we're coming up on the 6-year, in year 6 of that agreement, we have a power purchase agreement, I think, with Revision Energy. And in the 6th year of that agreement, we had the opportunity to purchase the solar array at a reduced cost. And so that's it's nothing to do with this year, but just, it's just a placeholder for, for future work is to do that analysis and see, decide whether or not we want to buy it.
Yeah, in reviewing the council's priorities list, I saw that in there, and so that's something that will be on my radar to put on my table. The good thing, you guys got into the solar business when it was easy.
Yeah.
It is not easy to get into the solar business anymore for large solar arrays.
Right.
I had worked on getting those in Westbrook when I first became mayor a little over 4 years ago, and they still have yet to be built.
Yeah.
I think that they'll be built this year, but it was something that between Central Maine Power not being huge fans of solar generation and the effect it has on their network, and some recent legislation changes that came into play that made it harder for systems of certain sizes and things of that nature. A lot of sizes and generation needed to be capped. So there may not be, it may not be as easy to expand that facility as it once was. It is much easier to do smaller solar facilities on, say, buildings and things of that nature. So I think it would be something to consider if we ever do a roof project on a building. Once we know we've got a 30 to 50-year roof, that maybe we consider putting solar on that roof and partner with a company like Revision or something to do that. But I'll look to get my hands around that deal and
we inquired about that last year, and Nate and the finance director at the time did provide the rate sheet that was originally signed, and I think each year we do get less and less benefit, and it's not so there's that also impacting the rates we're currently seeing. Dan, you had a comment.
When the system was built, the laws at the time, which, as you said, have changed. They're like up in motion all the time. We had to build a system that would not produce more than 100% of our electricity, or we would pay a penalty.
Yeah.
So it was designed to essentially create hopefully 95%.
Yeah.
But of course, it was an estimate at the time.
Yeah.
Knowing, sort of where we stand, at some point in time, when there is the time, I think that does make sense.
Yeah.
The panels themselves degrade in their efficiency about 2% a year. And the good news is electricity prices certainly in the last year spiked, but we're contracted in at a set increase each year. So far, I think on the back of an envelope, it definitely has been a savings for the town. But it would be good at some point in time to, know exactly where we stand.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions not related to electricity? I had a couple regarding the half position that is. So last year when we budgeted, we were budgeting a full-time position that was going to alternate between facilities and plowing in the winter, which it sounds like we're not doing that exactly anymore. So is it going to be two part-time positions now? Is that how we're doing it?
No, this goal is to get essentially start a new full-time position and ease us into it to only fund it for the half year to start January 1st.
Okay, so so we budgeted for a full-time position we didn't end up hiring last year, and so is this on top of that existing budget, or is it? It's
and the personnel, I'm not sure how their position was budgeted in respect to the budgetary figures. It was never filled. So,
right.
But the budget that facilities first put together included all the positions that you see outlined except for that half. and because they weren't sure whether or not that was something we could support.
Okay.
And as I got to the final budget and calculations and see what we could support, but while also having a responsible tax increase, this was something that we proposed to add to best support the department as the needs continue to grow in this
Okay.
department.
So after this year, where we're funding it halfway through the year for both facilities and public works, will it be two individuals and in two full-time positions? Is
Yep.
that what-
Yep, and so next budget year, we would show them that it's a kind of a mechanism that we use to step things into the budget
Right.
without experiencing that full.
Yeah, we did that a couple years ago with some firefighter positions. So,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm familiar
So
with-
next year, we would propose to include those full.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to understand going forward
Yeah.
what that meant. And then in regards to moving ongoing capital maintenance into the operating budget, will these allocations in facilities be treated similarly to the paving funds? Will they be reserve funds going forward?
Essentially, these ones are gonna be for smaller projects and equipment that we know is gonna get done in the fiscal year.
Okay,
So there's no need to carry these funds around or carry them forward. And so these will be designed to support ongoing maintenance of our facilities on a regular basis. For instance, with all those upgrades that we have to the the access control conversions and things of that nature, that's a bigger nut that these years, in this year, but next year, we may have other things that we fill those, or those accounts will shrink if we don't have any other needs or repairs. But we'll look to have those smaller budgets handled on a more holistic basis as things that Mo knows that needs to be taken care of, that we can plan, knowing that we have these ongoing maintenance budgets for smaller repairs such as carpet replacements, painting, things of that nature that we didn't have as substantive as a budget for in the past.
Mhm.
It's better to maintain our facilities than to replace them.
Well, yeah,
If we can maintain things on a more ongoing basis using this mechanism, the capital requests for large repairs will be cut down significantly.
okay. And Mo, I was reading the memos you included in the back, which were originally all part of CIP. A lot of the items here in the what's now capital maintenance, like the cameras at the library and the access control software, it sounds like a lot of those were quickly not supported by the manufacturers that installed them. Do you foresee that being a problem with these new installations? Because I don't want to have to go through this process of replacing them every 10 years because the software is not being supported. Yeah.
So the system that we are phasing out of here, the company was sold off and parts are no longer really available.
Right.
We're still waiting on access cards that we ordered in July of 22. It's just that much of a backlog.
Wow.
So our new system, the company that builds it, they built everything in-house and they're based in New Zealand. Every single part is guaranteed for 5 years, and they have 3 years worth of inventory in the United States. So they
Okay.
have to forecast. So our availability to get things is like before we even before the system was installed, they had everything waiting 2 weeks after we signed the contract.
Okay.
So the access control system is much more robust, and it's a lot more user friendly, and the company's been around forever. So it's a much better system.
Okay.
And then as far as the cameras go, it's very similar, and it actually will allow us to tie into our access control system.
Okay.
So the things at the library, when they were first done during that renovation, quickly did fall off of being supported.
Right.
The stuff that we've been doing since, like the cameras we've installed lately, are fully supported. They have a good backup to them, so
Okay. Yeah.
I don't foresee us having the same issue.
Okay. That's great to hear.
I also would add that, naturally, those things are technologically based, that we know the rate of what technology is continuing to improve. Like this new access control system, we'll be able to access the building using our phones, using, near field communication. And so those are things that over time, who knows, we might be able to have a chip in our skin that can do that.
I hope.
I don't know, but the things to change all the time and technology is improving. So I think there'll still be some instances where, cameras might become outdated or things, in 10 to 15 year timeframe, just like our computers.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that. I guess I was just concerned when I saw that the library installed cameras and they were basically non-functional the next year. So I just want to avoid a similar
It
situation.
may have been done in a cheaper way from the get-go, and
Right.
this access control system, you already budgeted for it last year for which facility?
So the library, New Begin, and then when manual arts get converted, already have it. So,
Have this system, so then we'll have the
Okay.
same system.
yeah.
Okay. Right. Anyone else? Questions? Dan?
Yeah, on just curiosity, Mike, I really like the way this all fits together. I think you're right. I think this will make the future easier. I do still trying to wrap my head around the sort of reserve fund piece and what monies will get carried over and which ones are an annual thing, but I'm sure that'll, as I have more time to work with it, I'll understand that. But one question I did have though is that you've broken out, lost my place, here we go. You've broken out, the different facilities into their own settings, but for building supplies and contract services, you didn't do that. Is there a reason why you didn't just include those in with those other new things, or?
They are. If you look on the contract services budget, they're all zeroed out,
Oh, okay,
and those are all divided out into each specific building.
that's me struggling to
No, that's okay.
follow the numbers.
Yeah, so those are, and we left that in there so you could see the old numbers, so you could see where it came from.
Yeah.
And you can see it's zero on the other end, on the new lines, but next year it'll make much more sense.
So those just got folded into what's now capital maintenance for each building?
There's a contract services line for each building.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
I see that now. Yeah,
That's what I missed.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
The last one was the lab building. Last question. Well, there's two pieces, I guess, to this. We, I don't know, 4 years ago now, had a survey done of all of our facilities and we were chipping away at that plan. I think we've taken care of all of the code issues. I don't know what's left in that list, that to-do list from that plan. Do we,
In reference to the lab building or everything?
well, everything in
We're still picking away at stuff. A lot of it's now smaller items that we can handle within the budget. So, yeah, that stuff we kind of were caught up with for the most part.
so that for all intents and purposes, then we've sort of completed that list of.
Wouldn't say completed because there was high priority things,
Yeah.
life safety,
Yeah.
code issues, other things that need to be addressed. Now we're just like kind of working the maintenance side of it to kind of keep up with it.
Okay.
So there will be things that come up, like, when they did that schedule, they said, within like 5 to 7 years, you're gonna look to do this, in 10 years, this. So we still have work to do, but for this year, we weren't tackling any of the big things.
So would you say that plan is still useful then? Is that still a guide?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, all right.
That was on my desk and planned to review it at some point, but I haven't
It's pretty thick.
got to that.
Fortunately, it sounds like a big chunk of it is done. So-
Yeah, yeah. good.
Yeah, no, Mo's talked to me about working through that and how his strategy around that. And specifically with the lab building, we have funds set aside in the capital portion for that. When we get to that, we can talk about it more, but we're gonna try to piecemeal that project, both from a historical management standpoint as well as an engineering standpoint. The more we piecemeal it, the more affordable it is.
Yeah, I guess
Time.
one of the concerns is the last time you had a discussion about the lab building, one of the biggest issues is accessibility to the building. And the numbers that we saw that would be needed to make that building accessible for either an elevator and lifts and things was a huge amount of money. I guess my question is, and we don't have a purpose for that building. That building's sat there. I mean, we've kind of remediated the asbestos and we've chipped away at those kinds of things. But I guess my question is it worth us and I appreciate the timing, we don't want to dig up the parking lot to do this at some future day. But is it worth spending $30,000 on a building that we don't use? And that we don't currently have a use for? That's the part, I guess, that I'm struggling with.
Well, so Mo and I talked about that. I think long-term, we'd like to find uses for it. And I think we need to maintain the building, and the proposals that we have are kind of basic things, the roof replacement and the electrical service. The electrical service actually being done as part of the panel.
It's just timing wise, it would be.
The timing wise, if we could do them while we're doing the panel project to replace electrical service and the roof. So that will get the envelope kind of closed up for that building. And then we can work to tackle different aspects of it over time and explore more affordable accessibility features. And maybe it could be used for certain space that may or may not be accessible to the public. So those are things that we'll evaluate in the years and months ahead. But I think the timing of this project, we thought, was to get the electrical service done while we're digging in the ground, and to get the envelope buttoned up so we can begin to explore future uses. The more work we do at once, the additional engineering services that are required and more aspects. So if we kind of piecemeal this project over time, it'll be actually more cost effective. But it'll be something that we'll look to identify uses for in the future. I think our friends in recreation are always looking for new programming space to support different groups that they maybe not have supported in the past. I know the Manual Arts building is to do that. We're also, in need of space for law enforcement services in the future. So things of that nature, we'll evaluate those options as we consider. But if it's a project the council's not interested in us pursuing this year, we understand. We're just trying to protect the asset that the town has and maintain it for the long term in the condition that it's in.
I certainly understand the roof, for sure.
Yeah.
It makes sense, but if it's not an issue for anybody else, we'll move on.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to put it in now when we're digging everything up. I mean, that's why we're installing sewer access for that building at this time. Also, I mean, we're just gonna have to dig it up again if we go to use it in the future, so it would ruin what we've already dug.
Yeah, from a functional standpoint, the building is unusable if it has no electricity.
That also,
So, I
yeah.
mean, but it would be nice to be able to use that building. And,
Yeah. We've gotten rid of the asbestos and other things that were preventing us from doing that, and might as well continue the investment if we're gonna maintain it. I don't know if Marty or Matthew have.
You have that on the capital.
Yeah, I saw that. I don't know if we want to project, does anyone have, before we move on, since that is capital, does anyone have any other questions for Mo about facilities or parks? No? Okay, yeah, we'll move on to capital then. Thanks, Mo.
Yeah, well, that's all right. I think Mo's gonna stick around for that since we have a lot of things relating to him in there. I also had included on the agenda a discussion about
Debt service.
debt services.
Do you want to do that first, or do you want to do some?
Maybe we can do that, and then the fire chief can go home.
Okay,
Since we have some more items. So the debt service is on page 75 of the digital budget. Oops. So one of the things about debt service is it was included in this capital improvement budget for some reason. So we moved debt service to the operating budget, and that's the general fund budget, and that truly is an operating expense because the capital expense that was associated with it already took place in part of a capital improvement plan. So this is more of an operating expense. So in the budget, you'll see that we put together these are numbers we're fairly confident about. In the coming weeks before we finalize the budget, we may have some refinements as part of our getting a grasp on all the finances. This has been one that's challenging to completely understand, but the retired bridges, road, and library bonds ended in the fiscal year we're in now, so those aren't included anymore. It includes the borrowing that you did as part of the fiscal year 24 budget for the Pennell manual arts, Pennell complex things, as well as the manual arts building, and then also the vehicles that you purchased. And then I've included the council has seen a talk for a number of years from the chief about a replacement fire apparatus that's going to be in need, at which the cost has grown in the last couple of years by almost $500,000. So we want to try to get into the queue to order this vehicle. There's a 24-month plus delivery time. And so we think it's important that we, incur this expense to get that into the queue for that construction. There's also, and the chief can speak to this a little bit more, there's a new, is it Bureau of Labor or emission standard? Is it the emission standard that's coming out?
It's new emissions.
Yeah, there's a new emission standard coming out for a fire apparatus that will raise the cost of engines significantly. And so we're going to try to get in before that emission standard comes in the next year or two. I think it's in a couple of years that's coming. So I included an estimate for an interest payment, and on your tables this evening, I included a bond estimate. The town has never worked with the Maine Municipal Bond Bank, which is a great resource here in the state to aggregate bonding resources. So we get much more favorable interest rates than you do with our current banking partner. And basically, our bond for a fire truck is going to be grouped with other municipalities across Maine for fire trucks and facility upgrades and things of that nature into a much larger bond that they sell and provides us the more favorable interest rates. So based on the forecast that they've provided us, our goal is going to participate in a fall borrowing, which is in with an application deadline of August. So once the budget's approved, we'll make that application. And you'll see, basically, as part of the fall borrowing, we're only required to make an interest payment in this fiscal year budget in the spring. So it is, again, another ability allows us to kind of phase in that debt service payment, and then the payment would go up to the full amount that's outlined on the document that I showed you. So basically, in next fiscal year, we would be required to make 2 interest payments and a principal payment for a total payment of $164,000. What's good about that is there's some debt service that is retiring in the coming years, and so those will roll off, and we'll be able to absorb that increased debt into this budget. I do want to explore. I don't completely understand the structure of the bonds. The Pennell bond and the Public Works Transfer bond, that's actually one bond that I've learned with US Bank that has a maturity date in 2030. And then we have the equipment bond, which unfortunately financed equipment that is probably going to be long gone and we'll still be paying for it, such as dump trucks and things of that nature. It was a 20-year bond for equipment that doesn't last 20 years, so it wasn't the best financing mechanism. So Tim and I are going to work together to develop an equipment replacement schedule that doesn't involve all the equipment need to be due at once and the need for a much bigger bond. But some of these may be able to involve some refinancing. And specifically the Pennell Manual Arts bond, that was financed for 5 years, and it's really a 40-50 year improvement that we're making to this facility. So it should be financed over a longer term, primarily maybe at a minimum of 15 or 20 years. And so I do know that the bonds, I'm not sure what the ability to pay off the status is for the Pennell bond and the Public Works Transfer Station bond, as well as the equipment bond. There is some lien payments that I kind of identified in the equipment bond that again, like I said, I don't quite understand that we've got to get our hands around. But the Pennell Manual Arts bond that was just done last year could potentially be refinanced for a longer term, which would give us some capacity and it would reduce our interest rate significantly. The interest rate for that with the Androscoggin Bank is 5%. Yes, we'd ultimately pay more interest over long term, but it would be a better digestible amount for the budget long term, given that it's a much longer term repair. We wouldn't necessarily need to do it for the full max 30-year financing mechanism, which we could, but we would try to better manage the debt associated with that. I don't anticipate in not having a full understanding of everything in the town. I don't see us needing to undergo any borrowing next year. But there may be something that comes up that we may need. So if we don't need to do any borrowing, then it might make sense to do some refinancing and trying to group all this stuff together, and better step it down in the long run.
Would you refinance it through this municipal bond bank? Because I don't think interest rates in general are amazing right now, so.
No, we would work with the municipal bond bank, who has the much more favorable interest rates. They have what they call a blended rate over time, as you can see in the.
Yeah, I had a question about that because it was variable here.
Yeah, so that kind of locks us in to this payment structure. We would be locked into that. And so it's what they call a declining, debt service. You can do where you can either work with them to do the declining mechanism or a flat mechanism. So you have the same number. The declining mechanism actually saves you in interest. Mm-hmm. So if I showed you the comparables, we would pay more in interest on the flat payment method than this method. And so if we specifically, if there's a desire to consider the Pennell Manual Arts bond, and we consider that, I could maybe package this bond for the fire truck and that bond together. And we may have to figure that out if we're going to do that as part of the warrant.
Yeah, I was going to say, how would that appear on the warrant? Because I don't want it to appear like we're trying to reapprove.
Yeah, so I have to talk with legal about how that's, maybe because we've already been authorized to borrow for it. We might be generally authorized to refinance it. And ultimately it would reduce our long-term debt and make it more digestible for the budget.
Yeah, I mean, the rationale at the time, I wasn't aware of the Maine Municipal Bond Bank, but the rationale for the 5-year bond for the Pennell Manual Arts bond last year was that we were saving a significant amount in interest with the shorter term. But it sounds like if we can get but that was still a 5% interest rate. So if we can get interest rates that are more like 2 or 3% through this bond bank, that might.
Yeah. Yeah, you can look it up. It's something that, it was formed back in, I think, the 60s or 70s as a way to help municipalities finance, and it saves in the bond issuance costs because you're not using an agent per se to they get paid commission on doing that. We save on a lot of those issuance costs, and those issuance costs are spread amongst many municipalities who are participating in that. And we just started using that in Westbrook in the last 3 to 5 years, and it resulted in a significant benefit. And the application process is much easier for staff, and it's something that I think would be better here. Honestly, Androscoggin Savings Bank, they're a good banking partner, but it's lending wise for municipal governments, it's not the best financing situation. And I'm a debt averse person myself, and that's why some of these, capital things, I've tried to build them into the budget. So if you get to the time when you can't pay for them, you either have to do them through borrowing or you don't do them. And so if we can be debt averse in that sense, I understand that. But I think especially that bond, the Pennell Manual Arts, it would just give us more room in the budget on an annual basis. We'd go from having a $233,000 debt payment to, probably a fraction of that if we spread that over 10 years or 15 years versus, the 5 years that was outlined. And most municipal bonds don't have the ability for them to be paid off early. Yeah. It's not like a mortgage or a credit card that consumers can pay them off early. They sometimes have it's called bond refunding, but there's sometimes a period where in a bond, if you have like a 20-year bond, at the 10-year bond, you can revisit it and potentially refinance it. Some of them have that term and conditions, some of them don't. So that's why I don't know the terms and conditions of those 2 big bonds that we have with US Bank, and I have to have a better understanding of those. And like I said, in the equipment bond, I identified what seemed to be like 2 balloon payments in fiscal years 33 and 39 that seem kind of odd, so that I gotta kind of better understand how those are, because that would create a dip in the debt service budget and then a rise in years, and that might be tough to absorb. Sometimes I've seen balloon payments are designed to get a borrowing across the finish line because it lowers the earlier payments, and then you leave it up to some other leader to deal with 10, 20 years later. I've been the leader to have to deal with some of those, and they're not fun to deal with. For instance, in Westbrook, we built a parking garage that is almost 30 years old or 25 years old, and we're still paying for it because there was a balloon payment done. And then the city didn't have the ability to pay for the balloon payment, so they refinanced the whole thing for another 20 or 30 years. And that's the only mechanism that you have to do those things. So I think we can better manage this debt that we have, and also better manage how we invest in equipment and things of that nature. And if we're able to reduce those, we could potentially reduce our annual debt service. If we could reduce the debt service of the Penn Manual Arts bond in half, that's essentially $100,000 savings we could have in the budget. I am concerned about the fact we're going to work hard in the next few months, once we get past the budget season, to get all of our accounting in order and to be ready for a fiscal year 23 audit that we're currently not ready to do, because those are important things that are needed in order to do financing. And so we are going to work very hard to try to get those things in order so we can be ready for that fall borrowing at the bond bank. If we're not ready for that fall borrowing, we can participate in the spring borrowing. We still have the ability to potentially order the fire truck without any deposit and get into the queue. But it'd be nice to have the money in hand. A number of the providers, once we get authorization to move forward with this for the fire truck, the chief will put out an RFP for the truck with the specs that they need. A number of them offer a discount if you pay up front. So, we pay the discount in interest, but we would be locked in, we'd have the money. So if we're able to get a discount to pay up front, some of them don't necessarily offer that or need that, then we could potentially, if we're not ready to do the fall borrowing, we would still have the authorization from the budget warrant to be able to do it in the spring.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like we need to revisit the refinancing of the manual arts bond. I would like to hear from legal about how we would need to word that in the warrants in particular to really understand what the repercussions are for that.
Yeah, I can visit that with legal.
Okay. Yeah, did others have thoughts on my question?
I just have a sort of comment. It seems like I'm not an expert in these things, I'll freely admit, but it seems like there's two philosophies. There's like you sort of pay as you go in capital expenses, or there's bonding that kind of or save for future expenses, and then buy them when you have the money accumulated. That's kind of one philosophy, and then the other one is bonding or something so that you could pay over time. And there's arguments in favor or against both of those. I mean, if you are saving, then current residents are paying that rate for a use or a purpose that they may not be around to use later on by the time you get around to making that purchase or making that improvement, whatever it might be. But then a bond may also end up requiring residents to pay for things that they didn't benefit from the first maybe 10 years or something, that it was in existence and they are the last 20 years. I don't know. I wonder if you could just give us a sense of your philosophy around bonding in general and kind of what's the best way to use it and going forward.
So as part of my earlier conversations at the last budget, and my lack of confidence in the total unrestricted fund balance, I had hemmed and hawed about, at least with this fire truck, and potentially proposing that we pay cash for it.
Yeah.
But not wanting to get closer to the restricted amount that we have without having a fiscal year 23 audit to understand what our restricted fund balance is. it would be my philosophy to really only borrow money for things that have a lifespan of maybe 10 to 15 years or more, and everything else that has a lifespan of less to borrow that. I know the town has a fiscal policy that kind of identifies things as a lifespan of 7 years that could be included in the capital fund. Really, it's you know, it's kind of, as things last a little bit longer, it's kind of like a 10-year. So that's why all those capital maintenance items all have a useful life of much less than 10 years or less. And so we've included those in the capital maintenance, where most of the capital fund items that we've had that are going to be improved in the capital fund have a longer maintenance period. In the future, I personally hope to better manage the capital budget. I think in the past, you've had some aspects of that where you had like a multi-year capital plan, so you can kind of see. Given that I'm coming in the middle of some of these things where there's some multi-year capital plans that have been butchered when you've had budget cuts and things of that nature, we just kind of handled capital requests that were needed this year on a one-off. I hope to do budget in a multi-year, and then I also hope to have different funding strategies that either involve use of fund balance, raising of money, and or borrowing on those different mechanisms. So you can kind of see a capital plan for things that will be funded in different mechanisms, and we can identify those funding sources on each. And that's kind of the method that I'm used to of what I worked with in Westbrook. But really, things that have a lifespan of 10 plus years really should be borrowed. The fire truck is right on the cusp of something that can last about 20 years. And that's why we're only financing it for 10 years. But it could be something that potentially, it's a small enough, not in a capital budget, that you could potentially fund it if you had fund balance, funds available, and not have to pay interest and not have to borrow money. That would be something that I would consider. But anything, you know, over the much more than the 1.3 million for an estimated fire truck really is something that we should probably finance long term and evaluate that with the longevity of the improvements. For instance, these Pennell and the Naval Arts building, you know, the septic system that we're going to put in there, it has a 30 to 40 year lifespan. The improvements that are being made to the Naval Arts building probably have a 50-year lifespan. And so combined, you know, really those should have been probably financed with a 15 to 20-year bond. Or if we want to be debt averse and avoid interest, a 10-year bond is a little bit better. I think once I can get into the flow of things here and better manage what debt service we have, the town has an outstanding debt position compared to its total tax levy. And that's kind of something that you kind of evaluate against the total, what total taxes or the total budget is, what your percentage of the total budget is, what your total debt is. And so sometimes that exceeds if you're making large investments. If we make an investment in sewer, we're going to be looking at probably, you know, $40-50 million bond, and how we pay for that and over what time is something we're going to have to be analyzing and strategically working through. So I hope that kind of answers your question in a long-winded way of my philosophy. I think some of those, like I said, I wouldn't have financed all the trucks at Public Works for 20 years. Some of those trucks are going to be gone and belted down, and we'll still be paying for them. So you never want to do something like that. And so we're going to have to be paying for some trucks in the near future that Tim and I are going to work to develop a replacement schedule on, so that we don't have to replace 5 dump trucks at once at probably $200,000 a piece.
Try almost 300.
They're almost 300 now. Yeah. So
Yeah, and I think I'm not sure what the rationale for running that term out to 20 years was, but I know that I still remember the conversation, but I did think that we got some cost advantage in having the money to be able to buy multiple vehicles from, a source at one time in cash and in essence, I mean, as far as they were concerned. And so we got some benefit from that, is my recollection.
it's part of it. Yeah. And I think once we get the handle on where our fund balance is at and what excess fund balance that we have available, I think we may be able to cover some of these shorter term capital purchases that way, and then fund longer term capital purchases through borrowing.
Dan?
Am I correct? In this description, the general fund balance that you're referring to, when we pass our budget, we basically set sort of in stone what we're expecting to spend for revenue and expenses. Sometimes we collect more than, and that's what's happened this past year. That goes into that general fund balance, which gets carried forward to the next year because we don't have permission from the voters to spend that money. Obviously, there's a sweet spot there, like there are all kinds of other sweet spots. You don't want to end up with like $10 million in the general reserve fund because you don't want to be collecting that much money from people. The long bond, 7-8 years ago now, when we were in a bit of a pickle as far as our capital fund was concerned. And we made some decisions to borrow money based on a long-term plan that very quickly, the year afterwards, became clear that that really wasn't the plan. We didn't really need the equipment that we forecasted as we had borrowed for that. We made some adjustments over time to try and cope with that. The goal of that plan was to use the money for the shorter term things would be paid off more quickly, and the longer term things like the fire truck would be paid off obviously over a longer period of time. I think the ladder truck is supposed to be a 25-year plan for that one. So I think we've been struggling with this program for quite a while and have struggled to try and look at it to the future and come up with some longer term plans that actually hold up over the long run. So I think that the work that you and Justine are going to do on that will be very helpful for that. As far as I think the fiscal policy is something you're probably going to want to change or update, in part because of there are parts of it that are pretty dated. We updated small pieces of it, but not done really a big overhaul. And I think that probably is the time when we need to try and get around the balance point between, what do we want to save and what do we want to spend. The Androscoggin bond, as you say, is expensive. It's a lot of money to pay. But ultimately, it will be cheaper than some of the options that we could have chosen. I don't know where that sweet spot is between the savings and for one versus the other. To follow on Ian's thought about, if we save for that now, for the future, people will have the use of something they didn't save for. What has been hoped over the generations is that group will start saving for the future also. And we'll end up passing along something that they don't in turn use, and as our society has changed, the way we spend and save money has changed, and I don't think our financial planning has really kind of kept up with those changes.
Yeah.
We've done, own to lease, we've done things that, 10 years ago, we weren't even thinking about or we need to consider. So I think it's good at some point that you'll do that. And I think the idea of, the deadline of the 23 audit in order to be able to participate in that program, it's nice to have that go along. So appreciate that.
And I think as we look more to the reserve fund program for some things, we can't implement those programs all in one fiscal year, but if we know you're going to need to start doing dump trucks, then we can look to how a combination of saving for use of fund balance and or borrowing. So we have multiple funding mechanisms to fund capital investments. There may be, I think I picked up on this when you talked about how the equipment replacement, you might not have needed all the equipment. There may be some proceeds left that I'm trying to understand some of our bank accounts from that 2019 borrowing for equipment that Justine and I have been trying to figure out. So there may be some proceeds left from that. So as we figure that out, if those are proceeds that are left over that we could maybe use for the fire truck or things of that nature, then we may avoid borrowing, but those are things I am still trying to get a handle
I
on.
can appreciate that, and I don't like to cry in public. But we had thought that that money had been used to pay down the bond. Or monies had been used to pay down the bond. And
I think it might be sitting.
in my mind, it sounds like that may not have happened.
And in the meantime, while it was sitting there, it wasn't properly invested and it could have made us a lot of money. And as we get to the bottom of it, we'll properly invest what we can, properly use what we can. And maybe we might have a whole different picture.
We certainly appreciate you and Justine too, reading through all that.
Yes.
Intricacies of those former bonds.
Yes.
Matthew, you had a comment?
Well, I guess, on the municipal bond bank, I know that's, widely used in the wastewater industry to fund wastewater infrastructure. And I think, it's a good idea for us to explore that as an option. A lot of this fiscal policy that we're talking about in terms of how to fund replacement and set aside, replacement costs and all that stuff is really what asset management is about, which I'm always talking about. So I'd be, very open to exploring that in the future, some sort of comprehensive asset management plan so that we're not deferring maintenance on things that end up costing us more in capital costs later, but also, planning for, to smooth out all these bumps and to set aside reserve funds as appropriate. And there's lots of, outfits out there that help with municipal asset management. So I'd be interested in what we could find out about that. Also, with this equipment bond, you mentioned these balloon payments that might be coming in 2033 or whatever. I mean, if we can't, if there's nothing else that can be done about that, should we be preparing now to set aside funds for those balloon payments so that some future council doesn't get knocked over the head with them?
I will do that as part of future budgets if that's necessary.
Okay.
And like I said, I don't know the terms of those bonds. It seems like it's been the desire of the town to have bonds that could be repaid early, from what I gathered from some of the fiscal policy that I read and some of the previous budget discussions. So I'm hopeful that those may be able to be, not that we're going to refinance those for long term, but if we can get those into a program with the municipal bond bank, that some of them are financed for 5, 10, 15 years, and we have like a blended debt service payment, it can help save us money in the long run, and then we'll have a lot less lines to look at on the debt service budget.
There was only one that I remember that we couldn't pay back ahead of time.
Yeah, so was that maybe the library?
I don't remember.
The ones, yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah, so we're,
interesting to see what you find.
yeah, well, like I said, the Pembroke bond from I think it might have been 2010.
Yeah.
That bond and the Public Works Transfer Station bond are really one bond. I don't know why they were broken out separately. And we took some of this from previous budgets to kind of work from. And so that's really one bond payment and bond and interest, principal and interest payment. And so those other two go away. And so that equipment bond that I think was done that one might have been done in 2019. Yeah, 2019, because it ends in 2039. So that might be where we find the proceeds from, and we'll find out whether or not that that bond is eligible for payoff. It may be, knowing that there's some balloon payments, usually that's what happens in those. So and we wouldn't want to finance that equipment any longer than we've already financed, but if we can maybe end it sooner using some of the bond proceeds and or a refinancing of some sort, we can manage those things and work out better. Yeah.
Okay, it sounds like, do you feel like we need to revisit this before we conclude this season, or do you feel confident in where you're at with these numbers?
Yeah, we want to confirm what payments are due this year and the numbers, and those might tweak a little bit. So I may come back to you at the end with a revised debt service budget. If I also get to the bottom of those bond proceeds, and find out what can be paid off. If maybe if nothing can be paid off, then at a minimum, we would be looking to seek authorization to use some of those bond proceeds, maybe for the fire truck, or to pay off which ones we can pay off. And so, you know, with that Penn Mutual Arts bond from this past September, if that bond and the rescue pumper may or may not equal what we have in potentially funds set aside, so we'll make sure we have that information together. If we don't have it ready for this budget warrant cycle, then we'll work to better plan for that in future budget cycles. There's a lot of things to unwind and untangle that is gonna take a lot of time, and it's gonna take a lot of money. One of the things I'm gonna come back to you with before the end is an adjustment to our auditing costs. We're working to try to get to the bottom of what those are gonna cost for us in the future, and it's gonna need to be adjusted based on what we budgeted for.
What's the kind of, there's sort of a standard audit.
There's the forensic audit, is
Yeah.
everything.
Are you gonna propose that we do a forensic audit?
Yes and no, I don't, based on what I can understand and our finance director can understand, we don't think there's any foul play necessarily, which would need that more forensic style. I think it's more of just complete disorganization, for lack of a better way to describe it. And
So
so,
those are some evils, that's good.
yeah, so the thing is there's a lot of money sitting in our bank accounts that doesn't match up with audits. So it's in the sense of in fiscal year 23, I'm guessing we over collected revenues and we underspent things probably significantly. So there was a contribution, but we can't make sense of what that will be. And then I'm confident in the fiscal year budget that we're in now, we're going to have over collected revenues and under expended expenses. So that's going to make another contribution to fund balance. So I think from a fund balance standpoint, we're going to be in a good shape. We don't have confidence in what that number is. We can only have confidence in the number from fiscal year 22, which I reconciled with you guys in the accounting that I provided and what the town has already committed to spend out of fund balance and what we're proposing to spend out of this year.
And that's exactly the same message we communicated to the community last September.
Yeah, and so I think when we can untangle some of these things, which is going to be my number one priority. So a lot of some of the longer term things that we talked about, we have to just manage capacity of what we can, of human capacity here in the office of what we can and cannot do in those orders. And it's my most priority to get our financial house in order. That's the most important thing for this organization. And we need to have our financial house in order.
Yeah, definitely. We should probably move on. I did just have one quick specific question in relation to the FY24 vehicles. Those were a lease to own purchase. Is that where they were supposed to be?
Yes.
Is that?
In the municipal world, they call it a lease purchase program. So
Okay.
it's not like a lease with the dealership where you pay a monthly fee. It's essentially a financing.
But it's not actually a bond
No,
as this.
no, it's debt service.
Right.
It's financing, and we finance those for, I think they end in 2025, so
That sounds right.
it's only like a year or two. There was only like 2 payments, so those will roll off. pretty
Right.
quick.
It was 2 vehicles, I think around 15, 16 apiece.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of which we haven't even taken possession of, so we haven't even expended the money yet, so that debt service may be adjusted in the future, but these are based on what was budgeted. And those are rolled off soon. And the mechanism that we're gonna do the electric vehicles we talked about in the code enforcement won't involve debt service because we're gonna.
Right. It's not like it's part of an EV program.
Yeah, it's with the EV program, a grant with both Efficiency Maine and Hyundai. And then if we want to keep the vehicles, we'll have a payment that'll come due, which will include in either a capital budget or a budget in the future to purchase those vehicles if we decide we want to keep them.
Okay. Well, it sounds like we should circle back to this again
Yeah.
later.
As far as the rescue pumper conversation, since the chief is here tonight, is there any more conversation about that, or is that something you guys have been expecting to come down the pike and don't? don't have a lot of questions.
Yeah, I mean, Chief's been preparing us for it for a couple of years. I didn't.
That's what he told me.
Yeah. Yeah, oh, Matthew, did you have no?
Yeah.
No, we certainly were expecting it, yeah, so.
That's what he told me, so I'm glad to know.
Yeah, and I'll just note that in the conversations, I've had lots of conversations with voters, but when the fire and rescue budget and policing or, the contract with the deputies comes up, people are, willing to pay that. I mean, I think they understand that it's a need. It's the sort of thing that, maybe you whine about the cost until you need it, right? And then you need that pumper truck at your house or the big ambulance or something to come and take care of you. So, but generally people have been okay with that cost, I think.
Yeah.
And as part of that, there's a piece of apparatus we're looking to replace. And the resale market and the trade-in market isn't that great. So we're gonna evaluate whether or not we keep that apparatus in, keep that apparatus in for, backup reserve.
Okay,
These ones, these we included in the capital budget. Yeah, we haven't got the capital budget yet.
Okay.
Yeah, we're on debt service.
Yeah, sorry.
Why are we not getting a fire trucks? Yeah.
Right.
well, let's move on to capital, just,
I think it was a really helpful conversation.
It was.
Just to
yeah,
get your thoughts on that.
yeah,
I think any fiscal conversation is critical and necessary. And I will do my best to lead you through that as much as we can. Thankfully, that's one of my strengths, so hopefully that'll help us navigate. So the capital improvement plan, we talked about a lot of it in general throughout the budget process because it touches a bunch of different budgets. But this is on page 77 of the digital book and on the page 12 after the debt service portion. And so you'll see that we included, and I included all of the request forms. We put together that request form that we had to give for each department to give an explanation kind of the project. And we'll hope to continue something like that in future years as well. And so you'll see a lot of the requests that came in under the manager column of the budget, we zeroed out. But because we moved a lot of capital maintenance and small equipment to the operating budget, which I think is a better place for a lot of those things. So with that, I'm not going to go through every one for time purposes, but you'll see in the I'll go through the ones that we've included in the program. So the facilities and parks, we've included the lab building, roof and electrical at $60,000. And we've included the Gray Historical Society intrusion system for $6,250. And you look at the request, it's actually for twice that. So I'm going to be working with the once it gets settled, working with Mo and the Gray Historical Society to see what they can do to work with us on that funding as well. So it's not 100% that the town's funding that, whether we can work through some grant opportunities or something to that effect to help with that, get that project fully funded. For public safety, we are doing central station door replacement of $10,000, LED sign replacement of $26,000, and a breathing air compressor of $37,000. That's what the chief was didn't want me to forget. In Public Works, we're proposing a stack replacement of $10,000 and an HVAC controls replacement of $40,000. And public safety and Public Works, overhead door replacement that's due for $10,000. In the recreation department, this is something that's been talked about and prepared. And Doug's here, I think he's still here, to talk about it. We have more conversation, we have more details on the Stillwater infrastructure. That Stillwater project that's been in the pipeline, as well as some new basketball hoops here at the complex for recreation. And then, as I talked about, we heard concerns from residents about traffic safety and things of that nature, and established a budget for traffic safety improvements of approximately $15,000 to help invest in some of those speed radar signs, pedestrian blinking signs, things that we can maybe move around so that we can use in different places, and some more permanent ones that we can invest in over time in primarily we'll be doing that in places that don't have bigger projects in the pipeline. Maybe we can get some portable speed signs or whatever to do this for the village, but we don't want to make any permanent things that are just going to be replaced in the years ahead. So we had kind of implemented a budget like that in Westbrook, a little bit larger, but to help with basically ongoing. So this will be something that I'll hope to do in future years to keep that account available, and whatever we can support for projects and Public Works can help us install and things of that nature. We'll be looking to include those. And then as part of the Lewiston Road project that Maine DOT is doing, there's some drainage improvements that we would like to make that would be the town's responsibility that Public Works and Planning have been working on. And so that's why we have that request in there for $15,000. So those are the items that are included in the capital improvement budget. And so you'll see they total requests of approximately 2.5 million, number of which have been moved to the regular budget, and also one of them proposed to be financed, a rescue pumper, and then a couple of them deferred in one deferment was the replacement vehicle for the chief, the command vehicle. That vehicle has a lot of useful life left in it. And the chief was just trying to follow the replacement schedule that they had. So we deferred that. And then we deferred the infrastructure work at the transfer station until we understand how we're going to be operating that facility into the future. So that's the CIP budget in a whole. It's also the total is substantially less than previous years, primarily because debt service was pulled out of it. Debt service used to be included in it. And then also we tried to be responsible with requests this year in an effort to have a budget that the community can support. And then, like I said, I hope to have a longer term capital plan, primarily maybe to get a 5-year plan in front of you on an annual basis so that you see what's coming down the pike and the funding sources that we're pursuing. Also, as we do more improvements, road improvements, I want to be able to show the public what we're leveraging for outside resources. So when we get to tackle some of the big things like the village transformation project, construction, and sewer, and things of that nature, we're going to be leveraging a lot of resources from outside of the town. So we want to be able to show the public, okay, we're going to be doing a $50 million project, 30 or 40 million of which is coming from all these outside resources. So we're leveraging a lot of investment for minimal town investment. So we'll be pursuing those and want to be able to have that better reflect. So this is part of our transitional. The ClearGov budgeting software that we're exploring has all the mechanisms to help give us a long-term plan, so you can see and better describe the things we're doing and the funding strategies. So we think that'll be very helpful as we manage these budgets in the future.
Have something? No? I had a couple thoughts, but some building maintenance was moved to the operating budget and some was retained in this CIP proposal. And I think you covered it earlier, where the items that were moved into operating budget were items that would have like a lifespan under 5 to 10 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, either 5 to 10 years or the regular maintenance, like to upgrade the door code system and doors and things like that. Those are things we need to do on a regular basis, access control and doors, and to just maintain this facility. It really isn't a capital investment. We already made the capital investment. We need to maintain this capital investment. When we do a major renovation or an addition or things like that, that's a major capital investment that we should include in the capital budget.
Okay.
But we created space for this in the operating budget, so that we won't have the ebb and flow of those things as much, because Bo is going to plan smaller projects in his operating budget and bigger projects in capital, because we've created the space for it in the budget.
Okay, that makes sense. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what I'm seeing here. And then, do we know which of these items have any carry forward from last year? Like, what are we working with
We
here? Do-
Understand any of that?
Okay, no, they're still working that out.
Yes.
Okay. Um,
Yeah, some of them, basically the mechanism that the accounting mechanism that was being handles, they were called carry forwards.
right,
When really, because sometimes capital projects go over multiple fiscal years, you should create capital project accounts, and that's what we're gonna look to try to reconcile. We're gonna start with creating capital project funds for everything that was approved in the fiscal 24 budget, so we can better account for those. And we'll have a capital project fund in our accounting system that will carry forward from fiscal year to fiscal year automatically. It won't be, you won't have to record, oh, we're carrying forward $50,000. If we funded a project of $60,000 for the lab building roof and we don't do it in this fiscal year, it's still going to be available in that capital fund.
okay,
And we will monitor those capital funds. And if there's like the funds where we depleted all but a little bit, then we'll then reallocate the whatever funds to other projects when we do the budget process, or we will if we've overspent things, then we may have to come for improved allocation for those if our projects end up having to be overspent in certain areas. And so those funds will automatically move from fiscal year to fiscal year, and we'll essentially hopefully have a capital fund reporting for you. So we'll have all these projects and we'll code them based on the year that they were adopted. So you'll see the year and the project, and sometimes they carry forward over fiscal years, but we won't call them carry forwards.
Yeah.
They'll then be reflected in the audit as restricted, they're essentially restricted fund balance because they're restricted to those uses.
right, and I think that's how we were using them before, when we were saving up for large items through the CIP in the past. That was the intent, was that, you know, we were saving over multiple years to fund something large in the future. But it sounds like there are other mechanisms for doing a similar thing. One of those items that we ended up dropping off last year, which we had saved for in prior years, was a skateboard park. And I don't know.
I saw some emails recently.
Yeah.
Old.
Yeah, so we cut the savings we were making towards that last year as part of the budget revisions. But those funds should be somewhere, and just wondering,
We will try.
question for the council, do we want to reallocate? I think we were saving $10,000 a year towards that, so we might want to revisit.
I would ask if we hold off on revisiting those types of things in this year.
Okay,
We'll get a better accounting of everything, and we'll try to give you a balance of where we.
yeah, I just don't want to lose track of the things that perhaps we have saved for and might need to come back to, so.
You may have thought you were saving for them, but they have not been recorded as such. The example we gave earlier was the assessing, the revaluation,
Right.
the equalization to refine it more. And it was supposedly, 1 in 5 payments over 5 fiscal
Right.
years to set that aside, and
It was
we
not,
can't find that.
okay. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what Krista was talking about. I think that when we do get to the point where we've identified all of the different buckets, I think that at that point in time, if there's a pool of money left over, that's when I think we should have the conversation. For instance, talk about the scholarship funds, which you
Yeah.
probably don't want to talk about.
I know, that's a good one.
And we don't have to do that now, but we found out inadvertently that we weren't following what we were supposed to be doing. We drew down the account more than we were supposed to. The council made an adjustment to that fund to correct that. I think I would just have a sticky somewhere with the list of things that eventually we'll have to sort out, because we have a legal obligation to that.
Yeah.
At some point, we're gonna have to own. And I guess, like I said, we'll just have to put those things on the list until you're ready to talk about it.
Yeah, so we have a resource. I shared an update with you all via email that we've identified to help us to try to reconcile things. Someone who's been a municipal auditor and who has managed, municipal budgets and school budgets and things of that nature. So we have someone that we've contracted to bring in using contingency funds that we have in the budget that we've also included some funds for next fiscal year, which between that and auditing, we're gonna probably have to revisit. Once we get him into things, he'll be able to give us an idea of what time he's gonna need to spend. But I think he'll be able to help us get to the bottom of a lot of these things and unwind some things. Like, for instance, in the last audit that the town did, there was $12 million worth of adjusting journal entries. That's not normal.
No.
We knew that.
And so that's why we've, as we've tried to uncover things, it's hard to, because that shouldn't be happening. And I think that's just more from disorganization. It's simply just disorganization, and because we've had, I don't want to blame it on anyone in particular, but I think that the lack of financial support staff has been part of that, because the one person trying to maintain the financial aspects of an organization of this size was not sustainable. And so I'm sure corners were cut and different things were done to just try to get things done and get bills paid, and why adjusting journal entries needed to happen, and why potentially certain concerns may have slipped through. And so I think that, we're gonna try to create a system of checks and balances and evaluate our risk and as we prep for the future. I've also been hard about coming back to you before the end of the budget with the third finance position. We're trying to really bring forth a responsible budget that the taxpayers can absorb and be okay with. So we're going to hold off on that, but I think that's going to be something that's going to be needed sooner rather than later. And because we have such limited staff, we can't dig to the past. We just have to work to keep moving forward to ensure bills are paid and people are paid. And so I think that's been some of the challenges. And Justine specifically in her short time here has invested a lot of time to try to figure out things that it's quite frankly been wasted time, because we can't make sense of things and we can't make things check out against audits and statements and all kinds of stuff. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to get that in order, but like I said, it's going to take time and money to do that. And I hope you guys will be prepared for that challenge, because I think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we are all hearing the message loud and clear that it needs to get done. One question I did have with regarding the Stillwater infrastructure. I know there was some construction still to be done in that development that's not potentially happening, or it's on hold. Are we in a position to have these invest $100,000 in these fields and have them be useful without that construction being completed? I guess.
Yeah, so we're not sure the timing. One of the things is that the developer is obligated to provide the land to us in a certain condition. And so we're not sure what the timing of that is. And we will not accept those lands unless they're in the condition that they're supposed to be in. And so we have that leverage in that sense. And that's a requirement of the contract zone and the planning board approvals for that development. And so we will, we think that these lands will be tried to be turned over in this fiscal year, which will involve us needing to do the infrastructure improvements that basically this kind of covers to be able to support the fields. Doug can speak to, I think, what the total $100,000 is funding. Is it, I think, water infrastructure, a few things like that?
Right, I saw the memo in the back,
Yeah.
and you can elaborate for people watching. I guess that was my question. Are we even going to have the fields available, and will they be accessible enough to invest this sort of cost? So
The expectation, I would echo the manager's input on this. The expectation is during the upcoming fiscal year, it will probably happen. There's some DEP is behind it. As a practical matter, the fields are an integral part of phase 2 of the subdivision. That's been to DEP, but DEP is behind for a lot of reasons. The infrastructure is important to include in the upcoming fiscal year budget. A real world example is the fields are probably not going to be able to be used this year, even if everything goes according to plan. You want at least a year for the roots, if you will, to get deep in the field, and the field needs to be watered. If the field needs to be watered, you need to get water there. So I would like to instill the importance of including this, exactly the breakout of that 100,000. We're not 100%, and the timing we're not 100%. But if the council's supportive of making that come to fruition as they were when this contract zone was established, we need to have the funding to work with the developer towards the infrastructure that was not included in the contract zone agreement.
Okay, and it would be, I think I was reading the memo, yeah, there's water, infrastructure, and also power, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And so in this case, to the points I made about the funding being set aside in reserve and capital accounts, if for some reason it doesn't happen, we'll have the funding set aside and we won't need to raise those funds from the residents in the future.
Okay, that's good to hear.
And we'll have had that, received that authorization as part of the warrants.
Okay. Do anyone else have thoughts on CIP? Dan.
Again, Mike, I might be reading this wrong, but on the spreadsheet for the capital improvement plan, at the second to the last entry there, the FY25 paving. Is that? I thought the paving came out of the capital plan.
So the request for this year was for the 660,000. We put it into the budget. Going forward, we're going to establish that fund in the budget, and we'll have the road improvements funded through that reserve account, and we'll identify those in the funding source in the future. So there may be a year where we know we need to do $1 million worth of road repair, but we only have 700 in the budget set aside that we may need to raise money either through something or if it's a major road construction project. So that'll be basically a funding strategy for the capital necessary, because road improvements are capital to the points that I made about talking, but there's something we do every year. We do an extent, so that's why we include the amount in the budget, and then we'll look to identify. So I basically took it out this year. We'll look to identify those in capital budgets in future years, with the identified funding source being the operating budget.
Right, so this line item in CIP was moved to the public works line item for paving, which was 700,000.
Yeah. So in the future, I hope to have a spreadsheet that kind of shows funding sources. So we won't be, in the case of the roads, as long as we're within the budget that we set aside, we won't necessarily have to be raising capital, because we'll have raised it as part of the operating budget, and that will be identified funding source. But like I said, if there's programs and projects that generate other, like if we're doing, road construction with the state, when we get to that year for village transformation project and things of that nature, we'll propose a capital budget that includes that. It'll include funding from the state, and it'll include a local share. So we'll identify all of that as part of those capital improvements. It'll make more sense when you see it in the future.
Yeah, and it's a different number too, so that the 700,000 that's in it, so that's.
Yeah, I apologize, I didn't mention that. There was the paving for
Two parking lots.
facility
and one at the municipal lot.
Yeah, so there was paving that wasn't included in the original request, and we included that in the budget. So that's why the original request that Tim provided you was for 660, and that breakdown of what those roads are doing. And it also shows you the future years that need to be replaced. When we did it in the budget, we added the funds for those parking lots that are necessary as well.
In years past, we included, I forgot what we called it. It was kind of like a CIP overlay. in case any of these things had cost overruns, it was kind of like a CIP contingency. We're not including that here. What is your philosophy on needing something like?
We didn't have that, but, I learned in my lack of experience with budget warrants that need to be voted on. I've learned that we need to work to make those as broad as possible. And so even the draft warrants that I prepared, I'll be refining to make them a little bit more broader. So it'll be my job, with the support of the finance director, to balance the budget based on the categories that are approved by the voters. And so if we have emergencies that we can't plan for, such as, major repairs or winters the crazy winters or things of that nature, we'll have to account for those, and those will be reflected in our final financial figures. And essentially, we'll have to balance the budget in those areas. By main law, municipalities are required to balance the budget. So if we are halfway through the fiscal year and we're on track to overspend the budget, we're going to put in curtailments in place, such as budget freezes or furloughs or hiring freezes and things of that nature that need to happen in order to do that. We did that through COVID, not knowing initially when COVID started, when we weren't receiving the revenues that we were supposed to receive, and motor vehicle excise tax and tax payments and things of that nature. We had to make some difficult choices to be able to ensure we balance the budget at the end of the fiscal year with the unknowns of COVID. Financially, COVID positively affected some of our municipal budgets with the Rescue Plan Act and things of that nature, and improved the economy that's ensued since COVID. So we've overcollected some of those revenues. But so if we had budgets that were significantly over, we would work to balance those with existing funds that are budgeted.
Okay.
If the town ever goes away from the budget warrant process that they have, and just to have a simple council authorization, then in the future, we would be able to get the council to amend, the authorization if there was things. And obviously there's less heartburn about it when you have a fund balance that can support it. And really, that's what fund balance policies are for, is for communities to be able to absorb emergencies. And the policy talks about when funds are used in excess of the policy, or that go below the policy, what the plan needs to be to build that back up. And so thankfully, you have an extremely healthy fund balance, and we forecast it to be we hope it'll be more healthier, and we'll best manage that with, set asides and, borrowing aversion, like not borrowing if we're using existing funds and things of that nature. So we'll best to manage that. But that's why fund balances are established and the percentages are established. So if you have budget years that you overspend, it can essentially be absorbed into that, and you have to develop a plan to manage that.
Right.
And the only essentially accountability that you have in that sense is the audit. So if you get the audit presented to you and it says we overspent in public works by whatever, and we had a winter, or we overspent in a capital program because we had accounted things, we would all be communicating that to you on a regular basis. So when you have the audit presented to you and it says, based on the warrant authorization, the council spent X on this, in this category, more than what was budgeted, most likely we would balance it out in the rest of the budget as a whole, but you would know about it and you'd say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And the audit's confirming that that's the case. But if we overspend, exponentially in public works and we didn't have a winter, we didn't have anything, and we didn't communicate anything to you, then you'd be like, the auditors reporting that to you, you'd be calling me and Justine and whichever department up to say, hey, what was this money spent for and why? And we'd have to explain that to you, but we will be transparent and communicate that to you and the public as early as possible.
Okay, so you see our general fund balance being used rather than saving in the CIP specifically for overages.
Yeah, it's kind of a cushion. In larger projects, we'll always develop a contingency. So if, a lot of times like in a project that Tim's working on, a road project Tim's working on, and other projects, the project budget has a contingency built into it.
Right, and I know Mel accounted for that in Pennell and other.
Yeah, so those contingencies are built into some of the projects.
Okay.
And some of these, this is a smaller capital budget, will be more strategic in the future.
Okay, yeah, I think it's just gonna be a slight adjustment, not only for us, but I think people voting on the CIP might be taken aback because it is significant. It's significantly lower than they've seen in years past, so they might have a lot of questions about where.
Yeah, no, we're gonna work to develop some educational materials surrounding that. The biggest change is the debt service being included.
Yeah, right,
That's
that
a
is,
huge number.
that is a big number.
Yeah, so when that was pulled out, that changes the amount significantly.
Okay.
And but we'll be working, once we get the budget approved on hopefully April 9th. The next 2 months will be educating the public as best as possible, and I will be available every minute of election day to answer any questions when people come in to vote and ensure that they have all the information they need to make a thoughtful decision.
Okay, Dan, did you, I thought I saw you in the
We
corner.
also have the ability to. From that. Also in the charter, we've done that.
Yeah,
We borrowed $500,000 for the ladder truck for that, which we have to pay back in 5 years, but in that case, we pay back in 30. So.
That's only if you go below.
go below.
Yes.
Policy.
Yeah, but we can do that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like borrowing from your 401k or your whatever
Yeah.
account you're saving for, you're paying yourself.
Because we have access, we don't
You
need.
don't have to do that.
Right, and it's below 2/12, I think, yeah.
I will avoid that as much as possible.
Okay, anyone final thoughts on CIP?
I
Again,
just wanted to note that you had mentioned to us that the school budget is coming in a little higher than you had anticipated, and is that gonna, are you gonna think about some of your budget figures as a result?
Because those figures have not been publicly released yet to the school board, tomorrow they'll be released and I'll have those. The superintendent has assured me that the budget that's being proposed is essentially dead on arrival, and they will be working on some refinements to bring that budget down. We will look at making some tweaks, but given the fact that we don't have a say in how the school budget operates, I know it's a factor in what the tax rate's gonna be. I think, I feel like we've put forth a very fiscally responsible municipal budget that we feel like is gonna have, I think even with some of the errors that were identified in the beginning with revenues, we're gonna refine those and it'll be less than what we proposed.
yeah, that was my understanding.
And so we'll have an increase that's really, in the mid twos.
Yeah.
That I think that hopefully the residents can handle the budget separate, and they're voted on separately. So if residents are upset with the tax increase associated with the school budget, then, we'll ensure to have that information properly reflect what each aspect of the budgets are, and it'll show on the tax bills too.
Right, I think it's always been a struggle where we feel like we have to amend our budget to absorb the school's budgetary increases.
That's not a situation unique to Gray.
But if you figure LD one, then.
Well, LD1 is not, the school budget is not.
Yeah, the school budget.
That's what I mean.
But I know, so we're switching that way, but I mean, in the greater scheme of things, it's usually the LD one question that causes the most amount of.
You don't have to ask that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, the state economist had estimated the growth, and there's a formula that goes into of like 4.7%. And so we're in what our base was and all those things, we're way below it. So we've got room to grow, and there's legislation pending to remove that requirement. That won't be in place for this fiscal year, but if it gets removed or not, we can evaluate how we handle that in the future, because I think over 50% of municipalities in the state don't follow that law. So, because there's no enforcement mechanism.
Well, they have a council that can approve it, or they're at town meeting where they can
Yep.
explain why there's an overage rather than at referendum, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got 5 minutes to spare.
Yeah, right.
We were cruising. We got held up on
Yeah.
That's,
broad base.
I think it's really helpful to have those discussions, especially because we're still working out this new relationship. So thank you for that.
yeah.
They were necessary.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will resume these conversations next Tuesday, the 26th, with a workshop starting at 5:30. Then we'll take a break for our regular council meeting and then come back to any remaining topics after that.
Yeah, we should be able to fit most of it within, in the hour and a half meeting before. There's only a few items to talk about.
Okay, well, that would be great. All right, so we will adjourn at 8:55 PM. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you. Yeah.